Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Office Hours podcast. I, Dr. Rhino, am joined live on stream by none other than ThunderheadStudio streamer, 3D designer, and really nice voice haver extraordinaire. Say hi to the folks at home, ThunderheadStudio.
I seem to gain titles by the week, and I haven't been consulted for most of them, but I'll accept them anyway.
The titles are all public domain, and since I'm the one applying them, you really don't have to be. You don't have to be consulted, so I guess you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Are these being applied to the legal corporation that is associated with my social security number? That
No,
indicates I don't actually have to pay taxes?
these are based out of, this is names applied to the Thunderhead Studio LLC that I created that runs out of that one PO box that like 500 companies use in New Hampshire. So
Oh man, I'm way behind the curve.
oh yeah, oh yeah,
I
not
have
true.
been
Pay him a
monetized
consulting
without my
fee.
will.
No. Is this the first Office Hours podcast, or have you already done one? That is an excellent question, the Calisandra. But I have done many, and by many I mean like 7 episodes of this podcast. You can find episodes up on YouTube, and patrons get exclusive access to new episodes for 1 month before they are released to the general public. So you right here are seeing exclusive content because once this episode is over, the only VOD that will exist will be on YouTube as an unlisted video, and that link will be shared with my Patreon. So exclamation point Patreon if you want to get in on that. Like I said, my guest is ThunderheadStudio, and while both of us enjoy occasionally, and in my case all the time, a good Games Workshop product, Thunderhead, you said something very profound leading up to this conversation. Do you
I say
recall
a
what
lot
that
of things.
was?
I can't be bothered to remember every single thing that I say.
Okay, well, you said something to the effect of Games Workshop thinks they are the whole puzzle when they are just one piece. Games
They
Workshop does
do.
have a very large section of the miniature gaming market, the wargaming market, but they are by no means the whole field of games that are available. Having been to Adepticon, I know this to be true. There were dozens of games I'd never heard of before. You happen to be an aficionado of these kinds of games.
I'm certainly a petty dabbler, if I may steal a line from John Constantine. Yeah. So this is something that I feel pretty strongly about, really, and has sort of come to a head recently with some of the marketing material that Games Workshop themselves have put out. One of the sort of anecdotes that I relay fairly regularly on my stream and to basically anyone who will listen is I remember and I want to say it was the transition from 4th to 5th edition Warhammer 40K. It might have been 3rd to 4th. But it was the transition of either 3rd to 4th or 4th to 5th where I remember the first big rule book I had. I opened the back and I opened the book and I read everything and I play the game and I'm like, oh, how exciting! This is amazing. There's men in power armor in space and they're fighting bugs and there's evil elves that like BDSM and it's amazing. And in the back of the book, as you flip past the here's how you can paint your Space Marines, here's the chapters, here's how you can build your own chapter. That was a great section of that book back then. Doesn't really exist anymore, as far as I know. Though I admit I'm a few editions out of date. Um, but you get to the back of the book, and there were templates and instructions for you to cut out and glue together your own bunker for terrain. And it was like you can go to, your local hobby store, you can buy some foam core, here's the blades, you print this template out, cut it, glue it, here's a bunker. Look, you're playing the game. Here's how you can make some trees out of wire. And I remember the next edition, I opened it up and that section was gone. And do you know what was in its place?
Was it advertisements for purchasing terrain?
It was advertisements for purchasing terrain along oh hey Walter's Workshop. I have to take a moment to acknowledge my boy. My
Yeah.
boy Walter's Workshop, the Jabroni Supreme. This fucking jamoke.
In
It's good to
honor
see you,
of
man.
in honor of this jabroni, chat, can you please spam our blanky emote that Walter's Workshop surprised me with? Fellow
It's an
streamer
amazing
Walter's
emote.
Workshop.
Wait, Do you have your own now?
I do, guys. Show Thunderhead, show Rhino Blanky.
Oh my god.
So no, okay, never mind then.
Okay,
So
okay. So okay.
and
There
also there were other examples of what you're talking about. There were times where White Dwarf would actually feature people's custom
Yep.
like orc vehicles because there weren't
That's
a lot
back
of them
when
out there.
back when I got White Dwarf regularly. I remember excuse me, my voice is a little scratchy. I remember very specifically an army that was featured it must have been in 2000 between 2000 and 2003. It must have been this army. It was looted Tyranids. There was a Carnifex with its rear carapace and the back of its head split open and held open very morbidly with these like rusty, nasty, almost like a big speculum.
Oh,
And there's an orc on its back with like these rusty rods jammed into its brainstem and this cage built around it. And it was like, well, this is a looted. I don't remember what it was. It was like a tank, but it was a looted Carnifex. I think that same army had a looted Necron monolith, and it
oh,
was a monolith model, and it didn't fly anymore. So there were teams of grots with logs, and one team was carrying the log around in front, and they were putting the logs down and rolling the monolith along on the logs. It was amazing. These conversions blew my mind.
and
And this was before orcs had a lot of vehicle kits. That was back when you opened the orc codex and it was like, oh, you want a looted tank? Go buy a Lehman Russ. Here's some bits. Make it orky.
exactly. That was the. And speaking of make it orky, we stand. Let's make it orky here. I love my girl orky. Anyway, the fellow streamer, please, for those listening here, twitch.tv/ let's make it orky. Go check her out.
Oh, that's
But
good branding.
thank you. Yeah, isn't it? But a lot of, like you said, a lot of the like there weren't a lot of orc vehicles, and if there was a data slate entry for some orc vehicle that there wasn't an actual model for, they would encourage you to. The one I remember specifically was a picture of literally a Tonka truck, a plastic toy truck, the like an excavator or something like that, that someone just obliterated with bits and just totally customized, and that was featured in an official Games Workshop magazine. Now if you do anything with bits that are not Games Workshop, you can't play in a Games Workshop tournament.
They have like percentage requirements now, don't they?
That was a like a colloquial thing, and then they kind of went to an all or nothing, and then a lot of people, myself included, thought the sky was falling because I used like third party heads that made up like 10, not even 10% of the model. But then like there was a lot of clarification, like that's only at like official GW events, and even then you could send a picture of your army and they would probably be like, okay. um but because of things like this, I assume you kind of started looking at other games. What were some of
Hold on
the.
just 1 second. I'm plugging something in. I apologize.
He's plugging something in. So a lot of folks, I'm assuming, similar to Thunderhead, may have, when Games Workshop started taking this, like, for lack of a better word, corporate approach, this more money centric rather than player centric. Because you can't fault them necessarily 100% because they're a business. Businesses make money. Great way to make money is to stop telling people make it yourself and you make it and they buy it. Now requiring it for gameplay in a tournament, that's a whole different ball game. But at least for their official stuff. But a lot of folks may not have liked that very much, and they started shopping around for other miniature games. Lots of miniature games existed alongside Warhammer, though it is
For a
still
long time.
the grand pappy in the eyes of many. What games did you start to angle yourself into after this sort of souring of your opinion of Warhammer in general kind of happened?
I can go ahead and turn my camera on if you'd like here at any point. By the
Oh,
way, I just went
I
ahead and got that
I would love you to do that.
shifted over. Let's see.
I can do this when you're ready. Go ahead, like whenever you turn on your camera, I have a button I can press that'll just instantly put us in face mode. I don't know any correct things to post incorrect things. On a scale of 1 to 10, I rank you at 11. I also rank Thunderhead at an 11. There he is. Oh, baby. I see the two little spinny things. Nope, then it went away. So thunder push buttons, thunder break buttons. I stopped playing at 6th or 7th when the Army of the Month was at its height. I kind of feel that way again, like history is repeating itself. While it is not necessarily the intended, there he is. There he is. While this is not necessarily the sole focus or the intended focus of our conversation today between myself and bam, there he is, my bebalded brother, ThunderheadStudio, wielder of the nod or the mug of nod.
This is my favorite mug.
Cane Brews. It kind of does need to be addressed that the fact that the focus, the theme for this episode of the podcast is the games that aren't Warhammer. Now we can sit here and we can bash and complain about certain decisions that they made, but the ultimate result of that is other people went to other games. Folks like yourself, like BattleTech. Tell me about your
Well, now let's give all fairness to BattleTech, and then that game is a solid 36 years old right now.
Oh,
BattleTech has been around for a long time. And in fact, BattleTech is one of, I would say, the few currently existing tabletop war games that has its roots pre Warhammer 40K, or rather completely removed from Warhammer 40K. As much as I am not a fan of what Games Workshop has become, and I have to acknowledge, of course, that as we have this conversation, it is impossible to have this conversation without talking about Games Workshop. I think to deny that is foolhardy at best. That's wishful thinking. But as much as I don't like what Games Workshop has become, and I don't, I'm always very, very careful to give credit where due. And they have done a lot of things right, obviously, or they would not be as successful as they are. They have pushed marketing at the right times. They have invested huge amounts of time, effort, and money into producing. And I'll just say this right now, Games Workshop, best models on the market, period. They have fantastically sculpted figures. They have people working for them who know how to make models to be painted, not just to look good, not to render well, but to be assembled, to be painted. They've continued to pioneer new ways of making models. They're fantastic. In fact, they're a great model company. I say model company because they're a shitty game company. They Warhammer 40K at this point, which is obviously their flagship and their centerpiece, is a laughably antiquated game in so many ways. And I would hold up the primary, exhibit A of this is the fact that at the core, the heart, the spine of a turn in Warhammer 40K is fundamentally the I go, you go system, which anybody who's played the game knows it's your turn, move everybody, shoot, do your abilities. Now it's my turn, I move everybody, I shoot, I do my abilities. That hasn't been the industry standard for over a decade. That's how they did things in the 1980s and 90s when we didn't know any better. And I think it's important as we lead into this to note that social media has changed all of our lives, whether for the better or the worse. I'll leave that for you to judge. But social media has certainly changed the texture of wargaming. As I in particular have been noting as of late, it used to be that wargaming lived in the garage almost exclusively, but now there's this popular conception of wargaming, the big table, the convention games, the diorama tables, the super high quality painted armies that you used to only see in, say, you got your monthly edition of White Dwarf and you flip through it and there's that amazing army they decided to feature. But now it's every day. Every day you can see a new one. Go on Instagram right now, go searching for Warhammer 40K. Somebody has posted 5 amazingly painted armies that nobody has seen before today. I promise it. It's insane. And also as a result of that, more tournaments are being played. The conventions are larger. There are more of them. There's more data on what is balance. How much crunch is good versus how much fluff? How should tables be built? This data didn't used to be available, and it is now. And despite the fact that Games Workshop has sort of been on the forefront of allowing it to be collected, it's like they ignore it for the most part, because other game companies have been adapting to it. Other game companies have been birthed and died entirely within that realm of trying to distill the perfect war game out of this information. While Games Workshop, because of its immense market share, has just been almost dumbly ignoring it, just blundering right ahead because they don't have to pay attention to it. They don't have to have a balanced game because they have the good models, they have the memes, they have the players who are. I've been playing this game for 10 years and I've spent $20,000 on it. You think I'm going to switch to another game?
Yep, absolutely. And
I don't know how you overcome that.
you don't have to, like you said, like once that snowball rolls big enough, people could sit there and complain all they want, but they're like, I've already put so much money into this. Short of taking an incredible amount of time to sit and wait and hopefully sell something, like a massive collection, you're never going to get your money back. So you may as well just grit your teeth, bear it, and keep playing the game. Black
Models
Skull
lose
here.
value the moment you take them off the shelf. I would say the moment you open the cellophane, but realistically, they lose value the moment you take them off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
If you put paint on them, they lose value exponentially, unless you're one of a tiny percentage of miniature painters. And I strongly discourage people to think of, and this is sort of part of a core issue that I want to get to, but I'll let you finish. Don't think of your models as investments.
No.
If you're going into a game based solely on the premise of, is this going to retain its value? Is this going to be worth it? Just put that out of your fucking head. That's craziness. That is one of those lies that we tell ourselves to be okay with spending as much money on these toys as we do, but it is entirely delusion, and stop buying into it because it's not really helping you.
Yeah, so Black Skull here apparently was a game store owner in the late 90s and early 2000s, and their GW rep always told them that they were a miniatures company that created games to push their miniatures line, and they were not a game company. That was a thing that I'm proud to say I fundamentally understood from a business perspective. A balanced game does not sell. Like you have to have that little bit of power creep. And then once everybody's power creep to a point where they're like, we really can't go any higher without getting into the ludicrous levels, you nerf everything back down to 0, and then you start the power creep again. And every power creep comes with a subsequent and just so happens to be brand new model. Auspex Tactics made a great meme out of this that like, oh, the Eradicators came along, the Aggressors come along, and every time they're a model that like has an absurd ability that people buy and exploit as much as they can, and then GW, almost like clockwork, 3 months later changes or takes away that broken ability, and then you're like, well, it's still good, but it's not what it was before. They don't care, they sold their models. And as far as the data is concerned, the idea that they're now taking balance much more seriously because the competitive side of 40K has become so much more mainstream within the hobby,
They don't give a shit.
that they give a shit insofar as it helps sell models. By working to quote unquote create balance, you create a cycle of like okay, great example. The Custodes get what is easily considered like the hardest nerf of the most recent data slate, their patch adjustments to the balance, to the balance levels. There were tons of people that posted their Custodes models like on eBay to just sell their armies. They're like, I'm out. This army is no longer good. It's gone. And then some other army, because of Armor of Contempt, like Grey Knights and Thousand Sons, are now like considered to be very viable top tier armies. People are now going and buying Grey Knights and Thousand Sons stuff because there's the meta chasers, the people who want to have the goods.
I still remember when they first started coming out with excuse me, not detachments. What was it? When they first moved away from the simple army building framework and started introducing was it detachments? I can't remember the name now.
I think it
was like thematic blocks where it's like you take these things and they get these special ability battle formations. Thank you, Drakari. And I remember the first time they released one that was like rhinos were way out of favor at the time.
And then they made them free.
That what happened was they were looking at their warehouses like, why do we have so many rhinos? Like they're not moving. We're not selling them. What do we do? Here's a formation and you get a free rhino with every Space Marine squad. Free in points, not free in dollars. Go buy a bunch of fucking rhinos. And what happened? Everybody went and bought a bunch of rhinos. And I remember at the time thinking like, oh, that's like, I hate it, but I see how smart it was.
Oh, it's brilliant. Like it's from a business perspective, like an amoral business perspective, brilliant. From a gaming perspective, from a longevity standpoint, you're like, guys, like a lot of people have wised up. More are.
I think that it's very reasonable. I think that this is a rational perspective to have, that we can recognize these moves as being smart business moves. Because I don't like to get into the cycle of being like, I hate big business, man. I hate them for making money, man. Why can't they just like, why can't you go to GW and like give them a hug and they can give you some Space Marines? Like, no, that's never going to be how it works. These companies have to make money. I understand that. I respect it. But I also don't have to lick their boot heels just because I understand how the fact that they're trying to make money. I see it. I get it. I, on the other hand, am a consumer and I look out for my best interest, and their success is in my best interest to a point. Their wild, uncontrolled success is not in any of our best interest. And I'm reminded of this when I see articles from Games Workshop where they use subtle language, like referring to building and painting models in the broad sense as the Warhammer hobby. That one gets me every time I see it. We've just welcomed such and such into the Warhammer hobby. These new tools are a great way to get into the Warhammer hobby. What a great way to pretend like you are the whole fucking deal, GW. That is just so disingenuous in the extreme. The Warhammer hobby, they're putting their proprietary brand name on the entire act of purchasing and using wargame models. And that is a point at which I start to go, okay, no, no. Fuck you. Okay.
They're
Because
trying to
as we're saying,
they're trying to be the Band-Aid, the Kleenex. Like,
yes, there's a word for that. There's a specific word for that, and I can't think of what it is, where a brand name becomes interchangeable with the generic phrase.
or for you folks in England, Hoover being synonymous with a vacuum cleaner.
Is that a thing?
Yes, they call vacuums Hoovers over there.
Do they say I'm gonna hoover the carpet?
Yep.
No shit.
Yep.
I had no idea.
Yep. They're gonna, just like the same way, like you say, like, you don't say, can I get a tissue? You say, can I get a Kleenex? You don't say, can I get a Puffs?
I say, can I get a soft nasal wipe generic brand, please? Every time I do it very specifically.
Or you don't get cotton swabs, you get Q-tips. They're not called Q-tips.
No, you're right. They're cotton swabs, but I call them Q-tips. Can I get a cola, please? A liter of cola?
Liter of cola? Does that look like spit to you? Does that look like spit to you? But like you said,
hold on, Calisandra, is Dumpster one? Is that really a thing?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Dumpster is a brand, or it was a brand.
Huh. Well, you learn something every day. But that you're right though. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it, and I see it too with the Warhammer channel, the Warhammer category on Twitch. I think that's less insidious from the outset. I think that was born from like people are painting Warhammer, Twitch needs a Warhammer category. But I think that Games Workshop also encourages its existence because there's people who stream to Warhammer, people who stream to art. There's a petition up right now to try and get miniature painting.
I added my comment and I did my vote.
I don't know that they're gonna do it. They'll probably just ignore it. But.
Well, someone pointed out, I think it may have even been you, along with a bunch of other people, the fact that there's a so folks, for you not understanding what we're talking about, there's a place where you can petition to Twitch to make certain changes. If they make them or not, that's obviously up to them. But this one in particular is to ask for a miniature figures channel for people to stream in, because you either really have art Warhammer or D&D are really the only channels that I see people stream miniature painting in. And what if I'm painting Conquest? The art channel really is a little too broad for what we do. We get lost in the shuffle. And Warhammer is very, very specific. And the exact same thing is like Warhammer is not, we don't want Warhammer to be the Kleenex, the Scotch, Scotch tape, the dumpster of the miniature hobby.
Yet, but we don't have to help them. And I think that it is, if you're a fan of this hobby, if you enjoy just the act of, I won't even say playing the games, if you enjoy the act of purchasing the models, because I get pleasure out of that, if you enjoy the act of building the models, because sometimes I find that more fun than painting them, if you enjoy then painting them, if you enjoy modifying them, if you enjoy putting them up as display pieces on your shelf, if you enjoy posing them around in dioramas, if you enjoy taking them to the local game store and putting them on the table and rolling dice back and forth with your friends in what is the logical evolution of saying, bang, bang, I killed you. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I had a shield. Like, this is the logical evolution of that. This is like two guys in a room and I'm going, bang, bang, I got you. And you're going, no, I've got a shield. And I'm like, well, all right, let's take a step back. Let's say that if I roll above a 3, I got you. And then we'll say that once I got you, if you roll above a 4, then your shield worked. Okay. And you're like, okay, fine, that sounds reasonable. And we carry that forward and we have the war game. If you enjoy this, which I think many people in chat probably do, I think that it is our responsibility to ensure that we still have choices in the future. Because a company like Games Workshop gradually becoming monopolistic is not good for anyone. It will result in the greatest Primaris Space Marine Lieutenant models you've ever seen in your life.
Oh, for God's sake, there's already like 8 of them.
It will result in hundreds more. But you know what it won't result in? It won't result in Mantic's Forge Fathers or Veermen. It won't result in Maelstrom's Edge, their Karist Enclave, or Aperian Foundation. It won't result in Privateer Press's Warmahordes or the Iron Star Alliance of their game Warcaster. It won't result
in my Old Dominion, the Dwegham and the Watroon. I don't know why I give
mention for the 100 Kingdoms that nobody ever seems to want to talk about.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of Bretonnian players crying. What did it like? I don't like the fact that I have to quote myself, but I recall once saying, "The 100 Kingdoms exist solely to appease people that refuse to accept that Bretonnia ceased to exist with the death of Warhammer Fantasy."
I'm not gonna pretend like that's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
no.
The truth hurts. The truth hurts.
The death of Warhammer Fantasy was, I want to say that was toward the beginning of my disillusionment with Games Workshop, because it had begun long prior to that. But it was one of the biggest, like, oh fuck yous I've ever seen, and it again. I understand why they did it. I get it. That was a game that had existed for a long time, and it was stagnant to the point where they could change things around, but like, players weren't buying new armies anymore. You already had all the armies that you needed for Warhammer Fantasy for the most part. And even if you were expanding on those armies, people were going to buy individual new models, but they wanted people to buy all new forces. So they blew up the world and they gave us the Storm Chads and one of the worst rule books I've ever seen in my life. That first one was atrocious. The one where it was like, if you're playing as a dwarf and your beard is longer than your opponent's, you get rerolls. Like, oh my fuck, what are we doing? Like, what? That was kind of an experiment. You know what? In retrospect, I'm gonna give them credit for that book, because that book was experimental.
Yeah, I was just about to say,
Games Workshop hasn't experimented since then, not one goddamn time.
Yeah, the thought of like, I like Age of Sigmar, even from what I understand now, like, yeah, there's Age of Sigmar tournaments.
To be fair,
the idea Vergaderung was making a joke about the first codex or the first rule book for Age of Sigmar being like 3 pages long. The idea that there are Age of Sigmar tournaments, but I think it is kind of universally agreed that Age of Sigmar is way more casual than 40K.
Oh yeah, that was the goal.
And to
It
have
is a
a more
brand new game.
to have a more casual approach to wargaming, especially from the company that today is very much focused on the 40K competitive side. Um, I like the idea that they're like, oh, like let's do a little fuck around and find out. Let's do if your beard is longer, whoever recently bought a round of drinks can apply the first buff to to your army. Whoever used the least silver paint goes fastest. Like things like that. Like go nuts. Let's be goofy. But clearly it didn't work for them with their fan base. They made some changes. There's a lot of things that I've heard 40K players say that they wish Age of Sigmar would transfer into 40K, like the fact that 2,000 points is way fewer models in Age of Sigmar than it is in 40K. Yeah. I agree with that. I would like to see it from that perspective. 40K be a lot easier to approach, but that don't sell models, baby.
No, it doesn't. They want you to buy as many models as possible, and then they want to make those models irrelevant and make you buy new models. And again, like, I get it. I see it. I'm not going to pretend like they're... We can't pretend like they're evil. Just like as much as I loathe Disney as a company, I'm not going to sit here and be like they're evil in the sense that they're like sacrificing children or whatever. They're not. They're profit seeking, and profit seeking is natural at a certain point, particularly once you reach a certain level.
That is the feeling of capitalist big dog.
We will buy a new cat. That's not something I particularly want to participate in so much, because again, there are talented people out there who have nothing to do with Games Workshop, or who once had something to do with Games Workshop but have since sought other, I won't say greener, because I feel like that implies a certain amount of monetary success that it's hard to beat with Games Workshop, but other pastures.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the rules writers for Conquest were some of the original team that worked on Warhammer Fantasy Battles and didn't really have much to do with Age of Sigmar. Rick Priestley, who was involved in the early rules writing for Rogue Trader and Warhammer 40K, he now works with Warlord Games. He has written a few games for them. And I would like to get into mentioning a few other games, so I'm going to start with, let's say, Bolt Action, Beyond the Gates of Antares, and Conflict 47. All games from Warlord Games. And the stumbling block for many of these, I'll just address this right now. Model quality and how many people are playing the game. These are the two big stumbling blocks for so many of these games, and this is where Games Workshop boxes everybody out. Because people play Warhammer 40K, because people play Warhammer 40K. It's a circle. And it makes sense. It makes sense. If you buy a random game on Steam made by an indie company, whatever. First of all, it's probably going to have a single player component, so you don't really have to worry about it too much. But nobody in your town plays the goofy game that you bought on Steam. Well, guess what? You just jump on the internet and you can go fight with some kid in Korea who's doubtlessly going to kick your ass because he has better hand-eye coordination and is arguably better educated than you are. And
that's such a low bar. I don't think you should aim just at like, I'm sorry, sir. I'm an American. We are in the bottom third. Thank you.
It's my right to be a dumbass.
America.
But you can't do that with a tabletop game. And when you buy a tabletop game, I understand why people want to view it as an investment and why they want a return on it, because you got to buy the models. You got to build the models. You got to paint the models. You got to find somebody else who did the same things that you do. Then you're both adults. You've got jobs. You have to figure out the day that you're both not working and you have a few hours and you're not so goddamn tired that you need to be sleeping. And then you got to go down to the game store or bring them over to your garage. You got to set up the table. You got to put out the models. You got to know the rules. It's a whole thing. So I get when people are like, well, I want to be sure people are playing this game before I invest in it. And if that's your primary driving force, if that's your primary, gate for getting into a game, it makes sense. AOS makes sense. 40K makes sense. Everybody in the army when I was in played 40K because 40K is played on military bases across the world. You get stationed in Germany, you're going to find 40K players. You get fucking deployed to Afghanistan. People are playing 40K with rocks and cardboard tokens, man. Like it's just happening. And it's ironic that pre-existing market share is what makes sure that it continues to exist because it's self-recursive at that point. And I don't know how you interrupt that, but the fact is that the rules aren't very good. And if people would take that risk, if people would push themselves out of that comfort zone and try these other games, I think that they would find them so much more fulfilling because so many people have never played anything but Games Workshop games. And when you introduce them to other rule sets, like, wait, you can do that? That's a thing? Oh my God. There are suppression tokens? What does this mean? And
I think there
it's why
might be the
I encourage people to look away from the competitive scene and remember that most of this hobby, the Warhammer hobby, if you will, exists in the garages and not at the friendly local game stores and not at the big tournament tables. Pick up a new game with a friend of yours because you're going to play more games with a good friend than you're going to play with randos that you meet down at the FLGS. I promise you that. It's such an interactive and intimate experience tabletop wargaming is, and I think we need to stop treating it like it's something that we want to exclusively play with people we've never met, because I just don't think that's really true.
So I think there's another thing to take into account because you're absolutely right. Like like I've been teaching my dad to play Warhammer, and I think that is so cool that my dad took interest. And I mean I love telling that story, but I'll save it for another time. But he's learning how to play, and that's a game that we play together. Yeah, of course there's scheduling and figuring out all that, but the fact that I have a small little table right over there that I just throw down some terrain, possibly even some of that ThunderheadStudio terrain. And
I was talking about getting some of that on its way to you today.
and then we got all of his models that he didn't paint. I painted for him. But there's Games Workshop also has the added benefit of decades of establishing lore in there, and also like we talked about before, the quality of their plastic is the best. Period.
It really is. They have the money and the overhead to invest in styrene sprues for everything, and it's hard to beat.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to beat. I want to say that Siocast is going to take a run at that, but we'll see.
So and I mean, there's lots of companies that seem to be, as of late, that seem to be stepping into that ring, which Parabellum Games, in my opinion, is the first to really take a shot at it. And
it's rare that a company has as much money as Parabellum Games did to start off with. That is a very rare thing.
that was one of the big things, is how they went from 0 to 60 so fast as a company. Like, just like, hello, we're here. Also, here's a 2-player start collecting box and 2 factions and tons of lore, and here's all our ideas and
full armies in styrene sprues. Like, that never happens. That almost never happens.
Plus the rule
Most
book,
companies
plus
have to work
all
up
that.
to that over a decade.
Oh, and they're willing to take the hit on profits to put all the rules online for free forever. Mm-hmm. The big thing, though,
they've toned back their expenses too. Did you get some of the initial run of their boxes?
Nope.
They were these nice, thick, laminated, hard cardboard boxes that had this nice clamshell slide fit. And I remember getting them and thinking, like, this is a lot of money to invest into packaging for militia. And lo and behold, within a few months, they switched to thin folded cardboard boxes that are much more industry standard. And I'm like, okay, they're not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. I think that they were overexpending themselves in a few areas at first, but they've dialed that back and they've reinvested that money into other parts of the business. A lot of it being competitive play and marketing.
Mm-hmm. And based on what I experienced at Adepticon with those guys, like, I got to meet Stravos, the guy who's the creative director for the game. Incredibly nice guy.
He believes in his product. That helps so much.
Mm-hmm. And it helps that it seems like the people who made that game. I love how this is turning into an advertisement for Conquest, at least from my perspective, because it is a game that I started recently. ! Conquest in the chat, because there's a link that will take you to the store, and if you use Dr. Rhino at your checkout, you don't pay anything extra and you don't get a discount, but I get a 15% kickback so I can buy more models to paint for you guys.
Hey, that's something.
Yeah, I mean,
and let's if Games Workshop is the dragon in this story to be slain, there are many brave village fools. There are many Don's Quixote, if you will, And there are
Ganskir,
very,
yeah.
very few. I don't think that's an appropriate pluralization of name. There are very, very few armored knights with any chance at all of really finding the weak spot. One of them is Parabellum Games,
Yeah.
so they have to be talked about.
And in addition to that, to make that jump, one of the big reasons why I made that jump was my local game store. The owner of it got his hands on some Conquest stuff. Don't know how he found out about it or whatever, but he finds out about Conquest and he's like, this is the shit. This is what I am going to push this so hard. I'm going to make my game store is going to be a Conquest game store in addition to a Warhammer store. And I was looking at it and I initially was like, I'm not into this. And he says, well, wait, let me tell you about it. Seeing the models in person, plus learning all the stuff that they had planned for it, really made me think, okay, I'll give it a shot. But at the time, the factions that were available, I think it was just Spires and 100 Kingdoms. I'm like, normal dudes on horseback, not my bag. And the space elves that force grew clones to fight for them, cool concept. The sculpts weren't really my bag. So I just kind of held out. And then they're like, oh, we have orcs riding dinosaurs. I'm like, you're getting closer.
Yeah, the Raptorks got a lot of people involved.
And then the mecha dwarves that made you go, oh, squats, but better. And
why are they all on fire?
The better question is, why were they not on fire to begin with?
No, fair dues.
And Privateer Press was the last company, but Warmahordes 3.0 was a fail hardcore.
I feel for Privateer Press. I do. They haven't always been the best company. They've made some very questionable decisions at times, but they try new stuff, and they went for some of the they became almost the exact opposite of GW in the sense that their game Warmahordes became hyper focused on perfecting the crunch of the rules. Their game became hyper competitive, and it was tight enough and well balanced enough to make that possible. And yeah, they faltered bad at 3.0. They lost a lot of goodwill, and they have not recovered from it. And I wish they would, because I don't know if you guys are even aware of this. Let me get another plug in. Warcaster Neo Mechanica. I'll tell you right off the bat, most of the models are in metal, and a good number of the new ones are in resin, which ain't great if you don't like metal models. But the game, like the gameplay, the rules are fantastic. I have more fun playing that game than almost any other tabletop skirmish game. And it has a low model count too, which these days I appreciate quite a lot.
As the guy
There's only
painting
so many games you can play with. Yeah, I know. I played not only 100 Kingdoms, but I have a militia heavy 100 Kingdoms army. Yeah.
I'm going like what amounts to pretty elite for my my plans for my Old Dominion army, but granted I'm doing non-metallic metal, so I am punching myself in the crotch with this. But I have to agree, like I'm getting to the point where I want to do a Chaos Space Marines army, and then I'm probably calling it quits as far as like armies going
Send
forward.
You my fucking Chaos. I've still got so many bits, and I keep telling myself, like, as long as I don't buy anything from GW, I just paint whatever I got. It's fine. But even when I get to the point where I'm like, maybe I'll do that, I don't care. I don't care anymore. We mentioned the Warhammer 40K lore, and it's like, I get that if you get into the lore like right now, or if you just got in the last few years, I totally see how it's exciting, and I don't want to rag on anybody for being excited by it. But if you've been in it for over a decade, you see how paper fucking thin it is. You see how meaningless and changeable it is. How anytime that there's some money to be made, they'll just rewrite the entire backstory of a faction right out from under it. And
well,
it's like
squats are changing.
Yeah,
squats are back, but squats went they went from they've added and changed some things. Like now they have their Votans. They are the leagues of Votan, and Votans are
the Votans are the big floating heads that they worship, aren't they?
Yeah, those big floating heads are AI.
Yeah, there you go.
And like
it's like a Zardoz thing.
Yeah, but there's multiple of them, and after thousands of years, it takes them years to get answers out of these machines. So now it becomes much more mystic. So,
I'm just saying, bear with me here. An entire army of Votans with custom models where they're all wearing that like red thong that
oh
Sean Connery
gosh.
had on, right? With like the ponytail.
Oh, okay. Somebody get on it. Well, I would say somebody, but I happen to know someone right now who does 3D modeling and does a very good job of it.
And they
And
can
that's
all like they'll
you.
be short and kind of like swarthy and hairy like Sean Connery. It's perfect. He's kind of like a dwarf, just taller.
Yeah, he's a stretched out dwarf.
Yeah, there you go.
Your leagues of Zardoz. Um,
I League of Zardoz. This is a brilliant idea.
make it happen, somebody. Make it happen.
Yes, thank you, target number. I didn't want to say it, but I was thinking it.
So so the all of this is revolving around the fact that there are other games out there.
Not just games, but fantastic games. Does anyone remember Havoc from the 90s?
Nope. Oh, the video game?
Just curious. Does anyone in chat remember the war game Havoc?
Oh, then no.
From the 90s. It came out in the late 90s. I think it was gone by the early. It might have been gone by the late 90s. Walter, of course you do. Oh, you get me. You understand me, Walter. It was you bought it in boosters, and this was really the downfall of it. It was made to be sort of a cheaper alternative to Warhammer, where you buy the models and they already had paint jobs on them. They were like cheap factory, not really all that good, but the rules were fun. The factions were interesting. They had a bunch of different concepts worked in there. They had robots and you could change the arms off of them to have different weapons. And you would buy these like blind boosters, and that was one of the things that killed the game. First of all, you bought all the factions in blind boosters, and secondly, they had an exclusivity contract with a specific toy store, like a specific not branch, a specific company. So only their toy stores would have these, and as a result, almost nobody knew that they existed. And even if you did know that they existed, you had to buy them in blind boosters. It was a series of poorly made choices, but the game was great. And there are so many games like that that have died just because of some poor choices here or there, and not getting in people's faces when they really needed to. We've talked about BattleTech before. I think BattleTech is maybe the biggest and weirdest exception to that rule, in that BattleTech, I think, has been mismanaged almost from the day that it was created in the 80s as a game called Battle Droids. It has been constantly and laughably it's a cursed property. Like Swamp Thing. You know how they've tried to make Swamp Thing movies something like 15 times over the years, and only like 3 of them have happened? They just keep falling apart over and over. It's like there is some voodoo curse on it that prevents it from ever being successful. And it's kind of been the same way with BattleTech. They borrowed a bunch of designs from Japanese companies in the beginning that they thought they had purchased the rights from, and then it turns out those companies didn't own the rights. There's the famous Harmony Gold debacle. BattleTech had to scrap a bunch of its original mechs and come up with new designs for them, most of which sucked. Like, it's been crazy, but the game persisted. Somehow it dug its roots into the minds of the populace through games like Mech Warrior, and somehow it survived. And yeah, I think video games are a big part of it, Shock, obviously. But the nostalgia is there to the point where then, as soon as a halfway competent company comes along, and I am not here to bash Catalyst Game Labs today, I'll do that on my stream. For the purposes of this discussion here, I'm going to say, way to go, Catalyst Game Labs, because they came out of nowhere with a Kickstarter, and people were like, have $3.5 million. And they were like, wait, what? Have how many dollars exactly? Okay, we'll make some minis. And because prior to that, the only place you could get minis for BattleTech, official ones, are from a company called Ironwind Metals that I don't fully understand how it still exists. It's like a company from the late 90s. Like, can you even order directly from Ironwind Metals online, Vergaderung? I know you can like go to their location and buy from them. Do you have to like email them a form or something to buy from them? Their website is so bad. And their models are all in metal, and the sculpture's so terrible that I can remember instances living in Texas trying to get people into BattleTech of inviting people to a game at my friendly local game store, setting it up, having them show up, look at the models, and go, maybe we'll play something else. And it's like, I can't blame them. They're really old and they weren't very good. And CGL has got new models, new sculpts, new designs. Are they the best in the world? No. They're the best for what they are. And they're making it affordable. And BattleTech has seen this huge resurgence, which is ironic because the rule system is 35 fucking years old and it's gone through one iterative edition.
Maybe that's why.
Entire existence. I think that's a weakness myself,
but well, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I think the fact that you could, over the course of its entire existence, you could have fallen in and out of playing BattleTech and been like, oh god, I'd love to get back into BattleTech. The feeling is there, but I guess I'd probably have to learn a whole new. Oh, nothing's changed. Okay, well I'm back in, and then you buy more models.
It is still the same game. They introduced a new version of the game called Alpha Strike, but it's a different version of the game. So if you don't want to touch it,
you don't have to.
And yeah, there are, you make a good point. There are a lot of people coming back who are like, I haven't played this game in 20 years since I was a young grog, painting all my models with goblin green edges on the base.
Ugh.
And it's the same game, which it makes it easier for them to get into. They tried a new version. This was one of the hilarious mismanagements with WizKids. They tried MechWarrior Dark Age, a new version of the game based on HeroClix. And this is another one, just like Havoc. The game was honestly great. It's really, I still think it's good. It's a great game. Some of the sculpts were really regrettable though, and they distributed it with blind boosters, and the backlash against that was so heavy that by the time they had made course corrections, it was just too late. And we're sort of outlining through that discussion some of the reason the Games Workshop won't do things like shift Warhammer 40K from I Go You Go to alternating activations, is because big changes like that can precipitate backlash in the entrenched fan base. It definitely happened to WizKids, and I guess you have to be willing to take risks to create, and this is going to sound so pretentious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Are you ready for it? I'm going to say it.
Mm-hmm.
To create art, you have to take risks.
Well, thanks everybody for coming to the podcast. Thank you, ThunderheadStudios. That was a great time. Okay, bye. Click. No, we barf. Yeah, from my perspective, as a new player, I'm not even in this hobby for 2 years yet, and I can already tell you for a fact, no matter what decision GW makes, the internet will burn every time they make a decision one way or the other. There will always be someone who is unhappy, and they will be very vocal about it. And they will band together with their friends and scream on Reddit and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else. But ultimately,
the hate is the point. Like,
to hate,
do it anyway.
Well, in that case, I think you're right. What's holding them back from the idea of like, okay, fine, we want to shake things up. We do have a huge chunk of this fan base by the short hairs because they have invested so much money in so many models. They're not going anywhere. We can change this up and try to get in new players. Let's switch to an alternating activation system. The folks at Play on Tabletop did some really awesome live streams where they tested an alternating activation system for Warhammer 40K at a 2,000 point game level, and few tweaks after their first attempt at it, making some logical assumptions as to some things that might get like messed up due to an alternating activation system. After those changes, it worked smooth as fuck. And I am very interested in something like that.
They may yet do it. I won't sit here and claim that they'll never switch to an alternating activation.
Maybe that'll be 10th edition.
Just doing that would not fix all the problems with Games Workshop.
It wouldn't
fix the way that they pressure local game stores with their sales. It wouldn't fix the way that, because like as a gamer, you have no reason to be aware of the fact that for your local game store to not just stock Games Workshop product, but to get preferential placement for the delivery of new product, to get certain numbers of pre-orders for new product, that's where the money is. That's so where the money is. You watch every time a new box comes out for Warhammer 40K, no matter what's in it, it sells out immediately. The entire printing. And then it's always, when are they going to print it again? When are they going to, it's this artificially created scarcity. And whether or not your local game store gets those boxes depends on a number of factors that you have no reason to be aware of, such as where do they position Citadel paint products in their store? Where do they position Warhammer 40K product relative to competitor product in the physical layout of their store? These are real things that get assessed. And if they aren't pushing GW more than other companies, they're not going to get GW. And that is, again, I understand it, but it's fucking insidious, and I cannot support it.
No, of course not. But there comes a point where, yes, in order to stand up to these sorts of behaviors, that's like the whole vote with your wallet thing that people say, as defeatist as it is, everyone here in chat, you and me, can say I vow to never buy a Warhammer 40K thing ever again, and to make it clear to Games Workshop and on social media that the reason why I'm doing this is the way they treat their store owners. Perfectly valid thing to do. They won't give a shit. It's not going to be enough of their market share to ever do a thing to them.
Task.
So
and I recognize it.
And Budgies actually pointed out your whole, like, anytime a box set comes out for Games Workshop, it sells out. Not true. Recently, their Age of Sigmar not Old Dominion, their Dominion box set that was Stormcast and their new faction of orcs or goblin orc dudes.
Savage orcs or something, isn't it? I barely pay any attention.
They're swamp dudes. That box set crashed and burned so hard. So hard. Yeah, exactly. It's just screw you guys. Stop selling Storm Chads. Give Matt Yee his freaking gits. Give him the book. Make him top tier meta. I want to see that man smile. He's so sad. But all of this, from my perspective as a GW, is where I started. It's where a lot of us start. I'm now.
It's the most visible. It's the most present, and it's where I started. I started in this hobby because I was in the city of Sterling, and I was a wee sprat, and I'm walking along with my parents heading to Sterling Castle to watch the changing of the guard. And my head, some force turned my head, and I saw a sign on a building, and it said Games Workshop, and I thought, what could that possibly be?
Well, I wonder what they make.
what do they make in there? Is this like some Willy Wonka situation? I had no idea. And I wandered away from my parents and into the store, which was a whole situation that would get resolved later. And there were gentlemen in there moving these little plastic figures around, and one of them looked like some dude in awesome, like, space armor with horns, and the other ones were like these crazy elf looking guys, and I was like, what the fuck is this? I realize now that those gentlemen strongly resembled what you and I have become over the years.
Bald, bearded, and white?
Yeah.
Bespectacled?
Fairly friendly.
Fairly friendly.
Jovial even. And that was the start for me. So I can't sit here and go, oh, I never really liked them all that much. Like, I discovered BattleTech after that. I had no idea this was even a hobby until then. So credit where due.
Oh, I will also take this as the opportunity to announce to chat that sorry, Thunderhead, I can't keep the lid on this project, mostly because it'll force you to actually do it. Thunderhead and I are going to make a definitely not official, not Gundam 28mm skirmish game.
We have been talking about it.
We're gonna make a Gundam skirmish game.
Why you gotta force me into accepting this responsibility?
Because I'm gonna help.
I do like the idea. It's something that I keep thinking about as far as how it could be done. Because, like, it would have to be, we've talked about it a few times, but it would have to be like, you got one hero suit or maybe 3 mook suits.
And then the mobile workers.
The mobile workers.
Because we can both agree that from Iron Blooded Orphans might be the actual best thing that came out of the entire series.
I'm in season 2 of Iron Blooded Orphans right now, about to finish it, and as much as they keep introducing, like, oh, this new Gundam frame, oh, it's got 12 dicks, I'm like, oh, that's neat. What about that mobile worker over there? That's really cool.
Yeah. It's a 4-legged multi, like
They're
the
not that
fact.
large target number. I think this is maybe one of the great misconceptions that throws people off. Mobile suits in Gundam are not that big. They're 35, 40, 45 feet tall. On the tabletop, they're roughly the size and mass equivalent of an Imperial Knight. GW's doing it.
And
It's doable.
and yeah, we could do 28 millimeter and get like, you know, like really detailed with the models, or you just shrink them down, make them 14 millimeter.
Yeah. Either way, though, it is something that I'd like to pursue, if only for, and this is my guiding principle in everything that I am willing to create and that I put out into the world. And this is something that I believe in very strongly. I think it makes my products high quality, and it keeps me interested in them. I make the things that I want to have. I make the things that I want to play with, and I want to play with that.
And you see, like, it's almost like I intended it this way, that you just ever so perfectly segued us into the other reason why I wanted to have you on here, because we're talking about other miniature games. We're talking about what a lot of people call niche games, because they're taking on that.
About Mantic at some point here, by the way.
Oh, and we will, because we're taking our interlude in all of these games existing, being as small as they are. Sometimes in the world of in the literal world of GW's market share, trying to find people to make and design specific high quality pieces of terrain, models themselves, bases, things like that for your little niche game are so hard to find. And that's where you step in. Because being a fan of all of these games, you have, due to not because you see it as a way to make money. I mean, that helps, but you see it as like, this is what I want.
Me spending time on it.
Yeah,
Making money makes it so that I can justify spending the time that I need to learn the tools and the skills and to do the work.
And you have shown that. Like, I mean, you just explained, like, you make what you want to play with. So you designing your Hextech terrain, your other terrain sets, the terrain set you're coming out with, that you have put so much thought into everything from the angle that the ramps sit at to allow them the maximum amount of positions so that nothing's sitting off lipped with like a weird overhang so things don't click together. Your soft lock rail system on said terrain, your Tachikoma's big like blue collar sister of a crane walker. It's
like that thing.
Oh, it's so cool. It's and yeah, guys, please !Thunderhead in the chat. You'll get a link to his page on Steel Warrior Studios, as well as his social medias, his Instagram and his Twitch. Please go follow him on those. But the stuff on Steel Warrior Studio, he designs expressly with the gamer's mentality. So walk these folks, because I know we've talked about this almost ad nauseum, you know, person to person, but I want them to understand what goes into the thought process of designing a new product, or in this case, us jokingly saying a new game, because that's what we want. Therefore, we go out and we make it. Like, where do you go from there?
I'll tell you where I start. And that is, I've been a tournament organizer quite a lot over the course of the time that I've been playing tabletop war games. I've TO'd for Warhammer 40K. I TO'd some for AOS. That was brief. I was really into and a huge supporter of Fantasy Flight games as they were trying to move into the tabletop like miniature war game realm. I loved Rune Wars. Rune Wars, the miniatures game, which was just an absolutely fantastic game. Is my camera not working?
Yeah, it cut out.
Oh, hang on. I think we can probably fix that. That might be because I have OBS open. Let me close that. That's silly.
You fool.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Why would I ever do that?
Because he's recording it on his end as well. He's about to scalp my.
Well,
he's
used against you, of course.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, he's trying to scalp my my podcast. Released it before I can as the Thunderhead. Like, welcome to the storm cloud.
It's the forecast. Come on, the branding is right there.
No, that's a ThunderheadStudio Twitch stream reaction podcast.
Okay, there we go. But like, I was a huge fan of Rune Wars, the miniatures game. I still think that that is one of the most elegant, innovative, rank and flank maneuver warfare games I have ever played in my life. Like, I still have all my models for it. I have, and I've thought a lot about this statement. I have never had as much fun playing a tabletop war game as I had with Rune Wars, the miniatures game. That game died because Fantasy Flight had no idea what the fuck it had, and because they were so busy chasing the proprietary IP of the mouse that they were willing to sacrifice their own IP on the sacrifice, make a blood sacrifice to said mouse in order to get Star Wars Legion, which that didn't really get them anywhere because that got taken away by Asmodee. But is neither here nor there. The point is, I did that a lot. I brought people in. I advertised. I used to at my local game store where I worked as kind of a hype man for a while. What I used to do is I came up with sheets, challenge sheets. A lot of these for 40K, where it was like, this week you can come in and get a challenge sheet, and you can fill it out for points at the store, and it's stuff like, I don't, God, I've still got some of them lying around. I did a bunch for Star Wars Legion too, where it was like, I'd have a quote from a movie or some meme in there from 40K, and it would be like, kill X number of unit with Y hero unit. Do this in this number of turns. Little like think of like video game achievements, but for tabletop games, basically. Just special shit you could do or push for. And if you did it and an employee confirmed it, you'd sign off and you get points. And if you get a certain number of points, you get store credit. People love this shit. They ate that right up. But I spent a lot of my time walking from table to table, and I swear to God, 90% of the questions are, can I see that guy to shoot him? What is this terrain represent? What is this broken window thing? It's like I can kind of see him, and there's like some debris or something, but like, is this legal? And you spend a lot of your time making calls like that. There are other far more interesting questions you need to answer as a TO, but a bunch of your time is spent just going, yes, no. Might as well be flipping a fucking coin most of the time. And it's frustrating to me to have to spend so much time doing that. And I always found myself thinking, what if the guy who made this piece of terrain, mind-blowing stuff, knew that it was going to be used for a war game, and when he was making it, didn't make confusing fucking pieces of shit that were going to cause problems in games? What if he did that? What if he made surfaces specifically designed for models to stand on? Oh my God, what a thought. What if he made pieces of terrain with some consideration of how they would work together in the overall flow of a table? What astonished me the most when I started making terrain is that there aren't many people who do that. I'm not going to say that there aren't people who do that. There are very, very smart terrain makers out there, but there aren't many who I think really play the games. There aren't many I think who operate tournaments.
It's about
I
theme
think
and
a lot of the
aesthetic
people,
over the game related benefit. Like,
yeah,
hey, what if we made a terrain set that looks like a bunch of ancient like Mayan ziggurats? And you're like,
which is
"Oh
a
yeah,
cool
hell yeah."
idea, and I love it. But it's like they almost always, particularly now in the day and age of the 3D designer Patreon and the race to the bottom, which is a completely different subject that I could talk about. Um, but there's so many people who I think are 3D artists who don't play games, who saw the market and thought, oh, fuck, I could do that. I can make a Patreon. I can make all kinds of shit. Sure, let's do it. Let's make some castles. Let's make some ruins. Let's make whatever. People are gonna buy them. And there's this ironic thing in so many of these Patreons where it's like they make tens of thousands of dollars at a time, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, and then they'll come out, they'll release, the files will go out, and then you never see them being used.
Yep. There
They're
are
just
people who
not.
just collect them like, oh, but yeah, but look at all these. I have 5,000 different iterations of a crate from 5,000 different artists.
And I
Oh, have you
remember,
printed them? No.
no, I remember a Kickstarter too,
But
because
what if
then
I
there was the
did?
onset of the modularity of 3D printing, which is amazing, that you can make all these modular parts and sort of build your own terrain. And I remember a particular Kickstarter where I started to get really fucking annoyed by it, and not naming any names because I genuinely don't remember which one it was. Um, but they had all these things where it was like, print out this floor, print out 97 pieces of wall A, print out 300 clips and clip them together. And it's like, really? You really want me to do that? That seems insane.
That's the
And
most
the
elegant
idea
solution
was
you can come up with a device that allows you to 3D print things in any configuration you want.
And the thing that got me though was as I was looking at the stretch goals for the Kickstarter, one of the stretch goals, thousands of dollars down the line, was, hey, you see this preview render that we made, this board that we built that looks awesome? If we get to this Kickstarter, we'll make a video telling you how many pieces you need to print and how you can assemble this board right here. And I'm like, we have gone full fucking circle right up our own assholes. This is an Ouroboros of stupid right here. The point of this is that it's infinitely modular and you should let your imagination build it. And if you give us enough money, we'll do that for you and you don't have to think about it. What are we doing? What the hell is happening? People are in love with the idea of granular modularity. And this is something I'm about to praise Games Workshop.
Yeah,
and some people may not like this praise. I think that their move away from complete multi-pose and towards more mono-pose or slightly modular pose is one of the greatest changes that they have made to their model line in a long time. Because I have built, I don't know how many Space Marines, Dr. Rhino. I don't know. It's a lot of Space Marines over the years. I once remember they were trying to clear out Dark Angels upgrade sprues on Forge World, and they were selling them for like $3 a piece, and I bought, I don't know how many. I bought like 30 of them. And I custom built so many Dark Angels. And here's the thing, after you do it a certain number of times, the 500th time. Now, it's not fair, Merlin Models. He's saying monopose is trash, never disagreed more. I'm not saying that monopose is king. I'm saying that it's somewhere in the middle. It's broad modularity as opposed to granular modularity, because I'm telling you that after you've built your 500th Space Marine, you come to this realization. All the times that you cut the wrist to angle the bolter a little bit differently. Every time that you made the modification to the collar so he could turn his head just a little bit differently than all the other Space Marines, you stop seeing it. Nobody's gonna fucking notice. You don't even notice after a while. It's all pretty much the same pose because it has to have a certain generic nature to it for all the parts to fit together right. So the poses are all slightly different, but they're all kind of the same pose with little variations. And when they're making more bespoke, not quite monopose models that are in more dramatic poses with bigger changeable parts, the models look better, and they still have enough difference in them that for the most part you're not going to notice. And I'm talking about this because this has to do with my approach to terrain. That granular modularity, that I can customize every single panel inside this building with the removable roof. I'm going to tell you something. I don't want to take the roof off my buildings. Nobody really does. Like, in some cases, it can be okay, but for the most part, once you go into a building on the tabletop, the rules where you remove your models from the table and you're shooting out the windows are almost universally better, unless it's a huge building. And even then, the internal structure of a building is often not very much fun to fight in. I watched someone 3D print a Camino board for Star Wars Legion, and they put so much effort into it. They put so much effort, so much talent, so much time. And it was these raised platforms, all, it's Camino, the round platforms all connected by catwalks and walkways. And I'm looking at it and thinking, I would rather just punch myself in the nuts than play a game on that table. You realize what you've done. There are now circles in which your units can exist and hallways they can advance along. That's the whole game. At that point, why don't we just line up on opposite sides of the board and just roll dice back and forth until somebody rolls higher and say that person's the winner? Because there's no tactical variability in that map.
Yep, there's no line of sight blocking aside from being on one side of a circle or another side of a circle.
And I think that people fall in love with these diorama boards and they don't think about what's it like to play on them. Yes. And that's what I think about every single time I make anything is, what is this like to play on it? How is this going to be, if I finish one game, can I quickly rearrange it and make a substantial difference in how it's going to flow?
So
And
in
you can't
addition,
do that with the granular modularity.
and when it comes to granular modularity, I'm kind of Azrael kind of summed it up, I think, for me. The easy to build Redemptor Dreadnought is 11 parts. The multi-part one, 121.
Mhm.
Like finding
Must be a
somewhere in the
happy
middle.
medium.
Yes.
And the
That
answer is somewhere in
said,
the middle.
I started this game with the Indomitus box. Bunch of easy to build bits, not a lot of customization, really possible short of stuff that a very new player like me, not knowing what he was doing and not really comfortable with it, you start chopping off arms, you start getting green stuff and milliput, and you start like bending and twisting and taking bits and, like you said, cutting wrists, bending, adding stuff. But having now gone back to and looking at the old Marines, they had a top half, they have a bottom half, and then they have arms. That's it. You're like, oh, but the posability. It's like, no, you either have them twisting one way or the other, and you have their arms either up here or down here.
They're
like, oh, you could
at one of these angles.
Yeah, and there's not as much. Like, in a way, it's quicker because they're simpler, and I think there is a certain thing to be said about the design of how Space Marines are kind of, especially with the Phobos armored Marines, going with that tactical, like slimmed down armor and antennas and shit, and just being more spec ops than what 40K is supposed to be, which is just bombastic, verbose.
I miss my battle monks.
Yeah, the guys with obscenely impossibly large shoulder pads. Like, yeah, there could be it, but at the same time, there is part of me that's like, the tactical stuff is pretty cool. Is it in line with the theme of 40K? Maybe not, but it's okay.
That falls under the aegis of things that I will complain about if given the soapbox for it, but I don't feel like my complaints are actually valid. They're just personal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things we need to accept, that all of this comes down to personal taste, and all of our personal tastes on this particular subject don't matter, because GW doesn't give a fuck what you personally think.
Oh no,
they give a shit. They give a shit about what their focus groups say and their marketing team say are going to make them the most money. Do not speak ill of my Saturnine Terminator soldiers or shoulders.
I love Saturnine. But I'm just saying, if they were making decisions based on what you and I like aesthetically, they would be a bad company that would deserve to fail. That's just it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I can tell you, I can sit here and tell you like what I like, but there's a reason why I'm a Twitch streamer, chatting with his buddy about our taste in mini games, and I'm not the marketing executive for a multi-billion-dollar company. That we are where we are for a reason.
It's like when people start to debate the plausibility of battle mechs and battle tech, and they're like, well, this isn't realistic. And I'm like, dude,
it's a giant nuclear powered robot.
Giant robots, they'd be engineers and not game designers. The fuck are you talking about? Like, shut the hell up and play your game.
That was something else that we had kind of come across. Like whether it was BattleTech or some other game that we were just talking about fiction in general, where people talk about like, oh, in the year 2020, people will have like this insane sort of world that they're living in. I think we were actually talking about Judge Dredd. And like how they were making assumptions about the human population and like what it would be like. And I'm like, well, anybody with half a brain comparison to 40K.
Way, we'll say to 40K, Judge Dredd is a great comparison, because 2000 AD and Warhammer 40K grew from the same soil. And at a certain point, they diverged sharply. Original 40K was very much like 2000 AD in tone, form, style, and even nomenclature.
Well, but, isn't that because like 40K doing what, or Games Workshop doing what Games Workshop does best? They saw something they liked in a different source material and just straight up stole it. Like
Games Workshop, they're the meme. They're the, you made this?
I made this.
I made this. Yeah, that's Games Workshop all over.
Well, let's see if hold on, Thunderhead. We're gonna reach through this reality right here. You're to your right. I'm gonna hand something to my left, and I'm like, look, I made this. Yeah, I've given it to you. Look, I made this.
Doing it right?
Yes, and now you're going to reach the other way and show it off.
Now it comes here.
Yeah.
I made this.
He made this. So
It's hard because your stream is on delay for me.
Oh, right. Right. I should have held the pose a bit longer. But the point is that like the Adeptus Arbites are literally Judge Dredd. Like right down to like even to this day, if you go and look at the Adeptus Arbites helmet, right up to the nose, right across, and a face like this. Mm-hmm. It's Judge Dredd like, This is my Dr. Rhino, again, do your best cosplay of Judge Dredd. I am the law. Like that's just
that's pretty good.
And then you got
grab my helmet, but it's in an awkward position right now.
But you've got Dune, you've got aliens and all the other stuff that they're stealing from. But like you said, they of course they come from a similar origin point because Games Workshop was copying his homework or copying 2000 AD's homework from the beginning.
And many people worked for both productions in the beginning.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Many writers. Oh, they literally share the same DNA and the same dark, sardonic British sense of humor, for that matter. And that's when exactly. It was a big fad in England for a long time, and it was largely poking fun at us, at Americans.
I can't imagine why they would do that.
Right.
But we're so innocent and small. Why
it was, the Judge Dredd was because the Imperium in 40K fundamentally is just like, what if these fucking fundy Catholic busybodies got their way and went into space? The Imperium. That's the joke. That was always the joke. It was always supposed to be dark and black and sick and a dark mirror held up to society. Yeah, Gazgul Thraka was a parody of Margaret Thatcher. It's
Margaret Thacker.
And it
No, wait, Gazgul Margaret Thacker.
They didn't forget, though. I'll say that sometimes. Oh, they forgot that it was a joke. They didn't forget that it was a joke. They chose to stop kidding because the fan base is dumb.
Well, what was the thing they released?
Didn't get the joke,
like 6 months ago?
Space fascists are actually cool, and it's like you're not supposed to look up to the fucking Space Marines. They're monstrous.
The video that Midwinter Minis actually did on like everyone, like you see all these pictures and books of like Space Marines with like chiseled jaws and like just being badasses, but he's like, go read the lore. This is what a Space Marine actually is. They are a horribly genetically and chemically altered 15-year-old, 17-year-old.
They're not human.
And that like they're like, you're like, oh, they have these chiseled jaws. No, they have a thing where their saliva is acidic, but there's nothing about their bodies being able to resist that. So spit naturally accumulates in their mouth. So their teeth, their tongue, their gums, their lips are just oozed and scarred and gross. They have like the same thing that the world's tallest man had, like where his face was really elongated and he had really big features. They got that. They're ugly as sin. They got ports all over them. They're just fucked. They're gross. They're disgusting.
Not even a species. They're incapable of reproduction. They have sacrificed everything that made them human.
They didn't sacrifice shit. They didn't have a choice.
It was taken from them, effectively. Even the ones who theoretically chose it after extensive indoctrination. Which again, that's the joke. Nobody has a choice in the Imperium. The Imperium is so massive, it trundles forward with such blind inertia, grinding people into the grease that it uses to keep the gears turning.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are worth nothing in the Imperium. And that was supposed to be warning us about our society. That was supposed to be telling us, like, in a tongue-in-cheek way, this is where we're headed. And that, to the fans, became, isn't it badass, bro? Isn't it badass when the Imperial Guard sends a bajillion people into a war zone and like 1 million die in like one shot of a demon's dick cannon? It's like, no! That's fucking horrifying.
Yeah, there's all the people that were saying like, oh, if there was any fictional universe I'd live in the 40K universe. I'd be you'd be dead in 6 seconds.
If you were dead in 6 seconds, you'd be one of the fucking lucky ones.
Yeah, it is a lovely statistic that I love. Not only that it was created, that it was written down and like canonicalized. that
Oh, canonized. That's right.
canonized in the 40K universe as a guardsman on the front lines, or actually no, as a brand new guardsman, your life expectancy in an active combat zone is measured in minutes. You have an average of 13 minutes to be alive, and if you get past that, you're above average. 13 minutes.
It's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be funny. And have you ever read the Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Primer? I have an old copy of it.
15 hours. 15 hours. Thank you. Thank you. Regardless, less than a day.
Deployment time. The Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Primer has an officer section in the back, and one of my favorite comparisons between the infantryman section and the officer section is in the infantryman section there is procedures on what to do if you are expelled into the void during space combat, and it instructs you to recite the litany of the void, expel all oxygen from your lungs, and move towards a breach in the ship with a swimming motion, and await rescue because rescue teams are on the way. And you get to the officers section on what to do if a crewman is expelled from a ship expelled into the void during space combat, and it says they're dead, don't try to rescue them.
Or like the commissar's job is to instill loyalty by killing anybody who for a moment hesitates in obeying an order.
Yep.
Like, you're gonna die either way. You either die by my bullet or whatever they've got.
And that's one of those sick jokes about the numbers of humans, is that is objectively a bad strategy, a bad tactic that risks the life of the commissar, but averaged out over enough time and with enough people, it's still functional. It still works because it's more, you can't worry about the individual soldier on that level when you're deploying millions to billions of human beings into a war zone. It's like they're just numbers at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not obeying, shoot one. The rest probably will, even just out of that initial fear response, that fight or flight. Because again, human beings are cattle at that point.
Yeah,
they are not people. And that is the great irony of the Imperium, is that it is the most successful that humanity has ever been, and it's not human. Not anymore. No part of it is. Arguably, the monstrous nature of the universe that we face has turned us into something monstrous, in addition to ourselves. And again, that's the great irony of the Emperor being a corpse on the Golden Throne. And it was always, because man, I remember before so many of this new crap was written. I remember 40K before the Horus Heresy was something that we had stories about. But it was always the irony where it's like the Emperor was probably an okay dude, but he hasn't really been in charge for a long time now. Humanity asserted itself over his works, and now we're just garbage. We took something good, and we made it so fucking bad. And that's why I'm just so turned off by the lore these days. As soon as I started reading about, like, oh, and then the new Space Marines and Robert Gilliman woke up from his long nap, and we're making new technology, and I'm like, I feel like you are just completely missing the point. Humanity should never be making new technology in this setting. You've just reintroduced hope. And if there's hope, you're saying that fascism can work? No.
No, but they're not trying to say fascism can work. They're trying to say fascism can sell more models.
Unfortunately, that is the truth of it.
But, and you know, it's funny you say, like, you can't find 40K lore to enjoy. The most, in my opinion, the most human character I have encountered in a 40K novel is a Necron.
Interesting.
I will 100% recommend this novel. It's a two-parter, because apparently there was going to be a third, but then the author was like, no, it's fine where it is. Left with an ambiguous ending, and initially I was pissed because I wanted more of this character, but now I'm like, you know what?
Sometimes the question is more important than the answer.
Yeah, 40K and as people, we want answers. We want to know every detail. But part of 40K is supposed to be, it is a world so convoluted, so filled with conflicting.
Jean-Luc Picard, a mystery demands an answer. We can't help ourselves.
And we have the 40K universe that there are so many sources of information because of how big the administratum is. Records are created, lost, mismanaged, rewritten. One copy of it gets edited by some inquisitor. Another one gets stored in a vault that accidentally burns down, and like we lose and find information all the time.
Might be corrupted by demons. You might find an STC to build a las pistol, put it into a machine, and instead it makes a bomb because it hates you.
Oh, that's actually one of my favorite short stories, is when the Adeptus Mechanicus and some Space Marines find an AI, and the Mechanicus start yelling at the AI like, "You're an abomination," and it fucking laughs at them, and then freezes all the Space Marines armor, like just like doesn't even touch them, just poof, like interacts with their technology, freezes their armor, and then
Just
makes
freeze the servos,
and then makes a bunch of the AdMech guys' heads explode. Just pop, 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 pop. It's a great little short story.
Again,
but
that's a lot of the black humor in the setting, is that we're like children compared to what we were.
Like the orcs, we regressed from what we were before.
Yeah,
and
our civilization is in decline. We're already dead, and we just don't know it yet.
The Necron book, though, is the Twice Dead King.
Okay.
Go.
I have not read that. I might check that out.
I highly recommend the audiobook version. It's the same guy who does the audiobook for The Infinite and the Divine, another Necron book that I highly recommend, because it's about Trazyn the Infinite, my favorite character in 40K, and Oric the Diviner, and it is millions of years of robot on robot, spy versus spy. They prank each other for millions of years, all based around an actual
I got
plot.
a little chub when you said robot versus robot. I'm into it, and I'm gonna have to check this out. I do enjoy
the Necron lore is
what's in the Black Library. Like if Dan Abnett wrote it, I'm pretty much into it.
Dan Abnett didn't write these, but he
I don't think so. I just mean, like, you know, anything he writes for the Black Library, I generally get into.
And it is good stuff. His the Ravener books, I am a very big fan of. Yeah. But
Ravener, Eisenhorn, Gaunt's Ghosts.
But yeah, like Dr. Dead says, it is indeed a comedy. Yeah, that's right. There is a comedy Necron book. Like, okay, let me give you a completely out of context quote. Oric the Diviner, millions and millions, 60 million year old Necron master of their type of science that is akin to magic. Like, he can see and interact with the future. He can go back, he can go into alternate timelines and insert himself into these alternate timelines where things went his way. And Trazyn the Infinite, millions of years old, master collector, knowledge far surpassing everyone in the galaxy. Orkin turns to Trazyn and says, "Trazyn, you fool, you have got us box seats to a coup." That kind of shit happens in this book all the time. Like, "Oh, I pranked you, haha, with a gene stealer."
It's like in
It's little prank. It's little prank.
Have you ever watched the Orville?
Yes, of course. We've had whole conversations about the Orville.
That's right. We have. I'm just thinking of when he tries to teach Isaac how to do pranks, and Isaac severs his leg and hides it in the ceiling, and he's just like, "I have pranked you. Now you must attempt to locate it." Yeah,
it's pretty much that. Like, or there's a window that Trazyn has. Oh, thank you for the follow, Koozie T. There's a window that is important to Trazyn. He likes it. It makes him feel fancy. And then Orkin, like, it breaks when Trazyn's looking the other way, and Orkin's like, "I can't imagine what happened to your window." I recommend anything. It's the same author, and the best part, it's the same voice actor, and the way he voices Necrons is very cool. So I highly recommend The Infinite and the Divine and the Twice Dead King books. The Infinite and the Divine is a single book. So
pulp.
This is perfect, like, paint reading. Like, it also explores an area of Necron lore that had nothing to it, which makes it that much cooler.
I was gonna say, I honestly missed the advent of Necron lore. The last time I was really into 40K, the Necrons were still like, the Necron lore went as far as, we don't know dick about them. The most we've read about them is that the forces we've faced so far are referred to internally as harvester fleets, and we've never seen a Necron war fleet. And they have changed a lot of that.
Yes.
They've given them individuality. They've changed the nature of the Satan. And I'm not even going to say I think all that's bad, because I haven't really read most of it. I think it's probably for the better. They didn't have much identity besides being space skeletons.
Yeah, they were the ripoff of Terminators. Yeah. Ancient pseudo-Egyptian Terminators, to now they leaned really into the Egyptian motif, dynasties.
They were always Tomb Kings, but I think that they just made them more like the Tomb Kings.
Yeah, I forgot about they had a Warhammer Fantasy allegory, or not allegory, a direct comparative.
Yeah, the Tomb Kings existed prior, and they were like, let's move them over into sci-fi. What do we do? Metal skeletons. We don't know much about them. Buy them. Like, okay.
Oh
sure,
yeah,
whatever.
and there's these things called pariahs. Oh wait, no, pariahs. We never talked about those.
I missed the pariahs. The pariahs were a neat idea. That was the closest thing to maybe we'll find out more about them. The pariahs, they're kidnapping our psychic blanks and turning them into these things. It's all gone now.
It's gone. It's all gone. we'll put the interesting lore in the Black Library, and it's gone.
I wanted to note that Walter's Workshop was talking about back in the day. So much of the fun in 40K lay in what was not known about the setting. And this is a careful balance because people called for a long time. We want you to advance the story. We want you to advance the story. I feel like that's one of the worst things they've done. Settings for war games are not like settings for other things. We don't need that many, like, heroes are fine for small scale conflicts that don't affect the setting. But now we've got heroes that affect the entire setting. We've got heroes like Robot Gilliman. We've got these heroes that are going out there and changing the texture of the war and the galaxy and moving the overall story along. And I feel like war game settings, by their very nature, almost have to be stagnant. Because war games are not about the setting changing. War games are about all these shit's going on, the galaxy's on fire. Meanwhile, on this tiny planet, zoom down into this tiny little area. Meanwhile, your dudes are fighting these dudes over something. And that's where the story is for me. It was always in standing across the table from someone and talking about what's going on. Why is it happening? What does this dice roll mean? What actually just happened to my guy? The number of times I've changed, with the agreement of my opponent. I think my camera froze again.
It did.
I apologize for that. I should be able to fix it very, very quickly.
You son
bitch. I have trouble with this USB port sometimes.
If you tried unplugging it and plugging it back in. So the and you kind of hit the nail on the head, where as much as like we want to treat it like a TV show where we get our story, you can have your cake and eat it too. And then advancing the plot doesn't overall do great things, but it sells models, it sells books, it gives Games Workshop the opportunity to sell more stuff, because in my opinion, we are headed for the Age of Sigmar of Warhammer 40K. We are headed for...
They're eventually going to have to blow it all up and start over.
Yeah, they're going to take all our circle bases and turn them into square bases, and we're going to get 40K rank and flank. And and it's going to be awful. But I kind of think it's going to turn into 50K. 40K there's going to be a time warp forward, and it's going to kind of reset the board, like everything that hope that you were talking about, the return of Rabute Gilliman, Yvrain and the Yniad are trying to bring back the god of death, and the Harlequins are doing some shit, and like, no, all of it fails. Everyone goes back to square one. The Tyranids get pushed back a little bit, and then like everything just resets, and then everyone just kind of like backs into their corner for 10,000 years again. And then everyone just comes crashing back in.
I'd be more okay with this. Let me tell you briefly about one of my favorite non-40K wargaming settings.
Yes, to bring it back to actually why we're supposed to be having this podcast.
It's easy to talk about 40K lore because it's been written for so long. Even just complaining about it, it's easy to talk about it for a long time. There is a game called Maelstrom's Edge. It is made by Spiral Arm Studios, who I believe are the same guys who run the forum Daka Daka, which is less popular these days than it was with the advent of other social media platforms, admittedly. It's a great game. Maelstrom's Edge is a wonderfully put together game. Version 1 of the rules is not perfect. It had a couple of glaring weaknesses, mostly in the way that melee attacks were calculated, which I never liked. But the rest of the rules work really, really well. I see people now talking about like Mantic's Firefight, and I keep seeing reviews of it because it uses the system where you move one model and then the rest of the model moves into cohesion, which is a great movement system. And they're like, oh, it's just like Star Wars Legion. And I have to like bite my tongue every time because I'm like, Maelstrom's Edge did this shit years prior to Star Wars Legion. But okay, whatever. We'll
You're always going to get compared to the thing that was more popular, not the thing that was chronologically first.
there are many things in this world that annoy me, but also make sense, and I am slowly being forced to acknowledge these things. Um, but Maelstrom's Edge is, first of all, I advise everybody check it out. And if you want to pick it up with a friend of yours, I think it's very much worth playing. The rule system is cool. The factions are truly asymmetric and kind of interesting. There's one faction called the Artarian Remnant, which was the concept behind it was the movie Marine, because in you're probably familiar with the phrase movie Marines for 40k, where it's like in the books they're written one way, where one space marine moves
Can
into a room and 30 Dark Eldar come at him and they start shooting, and he like deflects a round off his vambrace into the neck of another one, and he shoves his fingers through the eyeballs of their warlock like a bowling ball and then swings him into, like, that's the
yeah.
movie Marine. They're unfucking stoppable. uh that's how they built this one faction in the game, where I've like the same point size between two factions. For my Epirians will be 30 models, and for the Otarians it will be 5. Because each one of their models is the functional equivalent of an entire fucking squad. It's this huge hulking power armored dude, and their society is this hyper advanced technological core society in decline, where they sit back on their ships and they watch battles through cameras on the battle armor of their troopers, and they're like sports stars. They're like, go kill that guy over there and rip his fucking head off, and you like get extra points for going over and killing that guy by ripping his head off, because the people back home are like, yeah, kill that guy. It's insane. But the setting of Maelstrom's Edge is one of my favorite things about it, and it's because it is at this point more grim dark than 40k. Because in Maelstrom's Edge there is no hope. There's no hope, and that's really what I like about it. Because the core premise of it, and I'll reduce this to as quick a blurb as I can, is that we spread out across the galaxy. Our human civilization, we encountered intelligent aliens. We populated a huge portion of the galaxy using what are essentially dark matter conduits. There's this network of dark matter that joins the entire galaxy together. And by accessing that network and traveling through it, we achieve FTL. So we move along these pre existing corridors. And we have this huge civilization. The core world's built up into this massive, booming civilization. We started to settle the rim along the various spiral arms of the galaxy. And then one day, for no reason that anyone fucking knows, the core exploded. Those dark matter conduits began converting into an aggressive and corrosive form of dark matter called Cybele. And the infection of Cybele spreads along those conduits at seemingly random rates. Entire solar systems are just consumed by it, and it's called the Maelstrom. And it continues to spread one system to another, one at a time, or in big bursts. There seems to be no real logic to it. And the setting is humanity is fleeing for its life along one of the spiral arms of the galaxy, at the edge of the Maelstrom, always, to the point where you can look up in the sky on a world on the Maelstrom's edge and see this storm, because it's so large, it's a big portion of the galaxy that we're in. You can see your doom hovering over you at all times. And most people are just struggling to earn enough wealth, enough currency, enough whatever is worth something on the planet that they're on to afford passage on a ship to a planet further away from the Maelstrom, so that they can start over and do it again. That's all they've got, is just running and surviving as long as they can. And in this world, there is the primary faction, the Empyrean Foundation, who are sort of a soulless corporate conglomerate. And they have a lot of robots that are their primary infantry, because people don't really want to fight for them so much. There are sort of the rabble you can play as, the broken, they're called. They're just people who are cobbling guns together and doing whatever they can to fight back. There is one of my favorite factions who are very similar to the Brotherhood of Nod in my mind. They are the Karist Enclave, and they had one of their ships, the ship with their founders of their faith on it. I think there were like 8 people on it. Got partially pulled into one of the corridors that the Cybele was spreading along, and they're the only people known to have then come back from being partially inside the Maelstrom. And they came back, those who came back at all, came back with stories of it being a divine, transcendent experience. That this is the future, that the Maelstrom is heaven, and that it is moving to consume everything, and we must spread it. to the point that they have intentionally spread the maelstrom to some systems, and they enslave these deep space creatures that feed on the dark matter called angels. So they have these big horrible creatures that they use, and but like it's this really clever developed lore with a diverse range of factions in it, and it's a small game. It is just like it is currently in beta for version 2 of the rules, and the version 2 of the rules that I have played is pretty excellent. They're working on they stopped selling their original starter box because they're coming out with a new starter box now. They're kind of right on the cusp of adding some more into the game. The models are, and I'll be completely honest in my assessment, some of the models look a little goofy. A couple of the older sculpts are not the best I've ever seen in my life, but they pushed real early to make styrene sprues, so a lot of their models are available in hard plastic styrene. They're very affordable. They have kept them very affordable on purpose. It's not an expensive game to get into. It doesn't have a huge model count. It has alternating activations. It has command points for special abilities. It has reinforcement rules to the point that it is largely objective focused and not attrition focused. It is a fun game to play. And it has that true hopelessness to the setting that I think 40K lacks. And that might not mean anything to you. But if it does, if that's the sort of setting where you think, like, that's actually kind of cool. Like, I like the idea of those small scale conflicts where it's like, look, everybody's dead, okay? We're going to just find out if I can live a little longer.
Yep, it's
just succeed a little bit more.
It's the core of the survival instinct made manifest across like the entire remains of a species. Like no,
They've
no,
even
no,
got
like
a few books, decent books, not badly written.
but it's oh, and speaking of books, I had an epiphany. There is one area where lore in 40K I felt has been added in a manner that does not change anything but still gave you story, which is good.
What was that?
That was the books concerning the Alpha Legion, specifically the stuff concerning Alfarius, because all of it could be true, could not be true,
Yeah.
or whatever you believe to be true may have just been told to you that way in order to perpetuate a different lie. So it that is actually, in summation, like the best thing that you can do with 40K lore is you can tell it in a way that can be said like I love the idea of like conflicting reports about the same. Yeah, that's what it may as well be.
That unanswered question. It's just like Walter was saying. It was speculating over what might be true. Is the Emperor really a good guy? Is he really alive? Well, the setting isn't going to tell us because, as I said earlier, sometimes the question is much more interesting than the answer. When you answer these questions, you lock yourself in. And locking yourself in is the death of creativity. When you're trying to create a world where your fans can indulge themselves with their own creativity, you shouldn't be overriding their creativity with yours to a certain degree, yes, but not all the time. And
if you create
so
a
many
static,
questions have been answered at this point, and it's weird to me.
It's Schrodinger's nerdverse. There are so many different things that I can be like, oh, well, Thunderhead and I, like, we think similarly when we play games, given the fact that we are clearly blood related. We think a certain way about, like, oh, wouldn't it be great if in our little 40K
in the same room, we're joined at the hip, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, you can't see it, but we purposely light them very differently. There's actually a wall coming down right to where our we're connected at the pancreas. But the
named him Michael, they named me Pikel. Obviously, I was born second.
But the whole idea of like you and I create our own little headcanon of like, oh, like imagine in our game the Emperor stands back up. You 3D print some bits, we do some conversions, we build our own Emperor, and we have him fighting like legions of chaos led by the combined forces of his fallen sons, and we tell our own story. But then GW comes out and tells something like, okay, no, for real, the Emperor's dead now. Like he just turned into gas and just went poof. And we're like, well, shit. Like our narrative means nothing anymore because they collapsed the wave function, to continue to use the Schrodinger reference. Like
the lack of Primarchs used to be so much fun. Like even playing Ultramarines was more fun when I could be like, we fight for the notion that one day our Primarch may awaken from his stasis. And it was like, maybe he's dead, maybe he isn't. We don't know. That's never going to be answered in the lore, except one day they were like, he wakes up, he's fine. you made new armor and there's new Space Marines, and he's gonna, you can buy him as a model now.
And
Oh,
there
okay.
is a part of me that not for the sake of, like, these characters exist in the universe, like even without them having novels and you know, expansions on their story, that like they've said in the lore that up to before this, that Lorgar as some sort of weird snake demon, not Lorgar, excuse me, the the
Pretty
pretty
boy.
one, the pretty boy.
Yeah,
um they're gonna yell at me in chat here in a few seconds,
it's
but
escaping me too.
Fulgrim, that was it.
Fulgrim.
I said
Yeah.
it. I realized it right as Drake Hardy typed it in. Yeah, Fulgrim is like now a snake demon. Like,
I was an
I want
Emperor's
to see.
Children player back in the day. I like Fulgrim.
I want to see. I want to see us like a 5 sword wielding snake demon model. More than anything, just to have a 5 sword wielding snake demon model. And like, could I take a Keeper of Secrets and the one Varathi character from Age of Sigmar? Like, she's got a big snake body, but like, stick those together and make my own Fulgrim? Sure, I could. I'd rather not. I want to see what GW comes up with. More Rathy. I was close.
I'd like to briefly address what JP got rockets. Is that right? JP got rockets. Yeah, that's it. It's saying in chat there. Or you could just ignore the lore and play with your plastic spaceman. And admittedly, yes, you can.
Or you could start telling your alternate history. Like, you could be like, whatever lore you don't agree with, like, okay, Gilliman came back, and you could be like, okay, in our games,
and
nope.
This is like what people say. This is something I hear a lot when a game dies, when it's not being sold anymore, and someone's like, well, the game isn't really dead. You still have the models, you still have the rules, you can play it. But I think that it's important we acknowledge that there is something very real about playing a living game, playing a game that is being supported, that is growing, that has a story behind it. At a certain point, if we're completely ignoring the lore, it's like, why don't we just use rocks? Like, why don't we? Because we do appreciate some prompting to put us in this fantastical universe and to sort of fuel our imaginations. We're not. They're like writing prompts, you know. We're creating the story, yes, but we're not necessarily planting the seed. We're letting Games Workshop plant its seed in us, to use the most off-putting metaphor I possibly can. And it's sort of encourages creativity in people who aren't used to exercising that muscle, because creativity is a skill that you have to not only try to be creative, you have to practice, you have to cultivate that creativity. It's a muscle that many of us don't flex very often. Most of us don't have the time to flex that muscle. Many of us have jobs, multiple jobs, children to raise. We have other shit to do. We have businesses to run. We have lives to live. And giving us those, I'm going to use the phrase writing prompts again, because I feel like that's kind of what the wargaming universe is, giving us those prompts and the framework of the story within which we can tell ours, makes it easy to tell a story in 4 hours on the table in your garage without having to sit down and go like, okay, what is the universe I'm writing this in?
So I guess this
we've got soldier mans, sure, but who do they work for? What are they fighting over? What do they value? It answers these questions for us so that we can then determine the specifics, and I think that there is value in that.
So that then opens up the question concerning, like, to bring it back to these alternates of 40K, we talk about not wanting to progress the story, to advance the story, to change things.
That's a personal complaint of mine for 40K, to be fair. I don't
true.
feel like that's a valid mega critique of Games Workshop. That's just like,
well, okay, so I mean, even with you personally, that's an interesting perspective to have when you compare it to, granted, and it's all about approach. The universe that GW is creating, this grimdark universe, is supposed to be a parody where things never change because we're fucked. It's just a matter of we're taking forever to die. But but you look at Parabellum with the Conquest universe, their land of I believe it's called. But that is, they call it Ia. Yeah, they call it a living world. You get to vote, you participate, and you get you get rewarded for participating, for reading these lore blurbs that people
It's
write.
designed that way from the outset, though.
That is true. That it is designed to allow, like, I mean, the fact that Old Dominion was released when it was released, because they literally did a vote. Which of these 5 factions do you want to have come into the game first? And we're going to write the lore to make it happen. And which characters for which factions move through the world and like potentially interact, leading to, like, I don't know, if the warlord, one of the characters for the Old Dominion, makes his way across the continent, and some Nord character works across in the opposite direction, and they face off. Does that mean we potentially get a Nord v Old Dominion box set because we like moved them that way?
Compelling idea.
I voted for Weavers. I think Weavers look really cool too. I might pick up Weavers as well, because did you hear about the rumor?
Walter's always the dark horse. He picks whatever he thinks is going to lose so that he can come into chats and say things like that. Just ignore him.
What a jabroni. So he brought up Weavers, and I was tempted, like, oh, I get into Weavers, but I don't want to do a whole nother army. And then I heard, did you guys hear this rumor that right now there are 2 ways to play with Conquest? You have Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings, which is the big rank and flank game, which is everybody in a stand like this. And then you have First Blood, which is kind of like Age of Sigmar scale, if I remember correctly, like fewer models, and you use the circles, but there's still a fair amount of the models. There is rumor, and I believe this to be true, that there will be a skirmish version of Conquest eventually as well. So there will be a time where I can now start, quote unquote, building kill teams for these other factions, so I can still enjoy them at a smaller scale. And if I end up liking them more, I can slowly add more models, work up, and you can start with the skirmish and end up in the world of like the full Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings game style, which is pretty cool. You can pick the level you want to play at.
This is kind of a perfect segue into another game and company that I like to mention. That being Mantic Games. Who,
it's like, again, oh yeah, you did say you want to talk about Mantic, so it's like we know what we're doing.
I wouldn't say that. They are another company who have their roots in the same soil as Games Workshop. A number of people who used to work for Games Workshop, I believe, founded Mantic. They're also Nottingham-based, which Nottingham, if you're not aware, is sort of the birthplace of the modern wargaming movement in a lot of ways. They exist in kind of a weird bubble up there, too. But Mantic has been at this game for a while as well, trying to get their own war games made, and they used a lot of resin for a long time, but more recently they've been able to release a lot more styrene model kits, which I always mention because it's important. But they've gone through a few less than successful permutations. They wanted to, their setting is called Warpath, and they did a Kickstarter for it, and the concept behind Warpath was they wanted to do epic 40K size games at 28mm scale. Which, when you say the idea out loud, it's like, it's an interesting idea. How are you going to make it work? The answer is they wouldn't. They did the Kickstarter. It went through. I remember when it came out, people made these huge armies. There were 2 guys where I was living who made these huge armies, and they set them up, just filled their halves of the tables with sci-fi models that were in like rank stands because there were so many of them packed so tightly, and so many. One side had all these flyers, and one round of the game played out, and all the flyers flew over to the other side and blew up the whole other force, and it was like, oh, this game is fucking terrible. So they never played it again. It was Warpath was a big mistake, in my opinion. I respect what they were trying to do. I respect the hell out of it, but the truth is that it's almost impossible to do that. 40K Apocalypse, JP got Rockets brings that up. 40K Apocalypse is dog shit. It's never been fun. I remember when it was on the rise and play these massive battles. It's not fun. It's not fun. It's again removing the tactical element from the game to the point that we might as well just just roll one die, and whoever rolls higher wins, and then we can go to the bar sooner, because that's what's going on here. Is why are we doing this?
I think at that point it would actually be more fun to take turns moving your things forward and D&D style telling super awesome narrative things, and then you and I like we
a
move
storyteller, and it's like whoever tells the best story, the arbiter is like, you succeed. Like that would be more fun to me.
Or like you have, our two models, like think of these, of course, at the scale of like Titans, but our two models move within a certain range of each other. We roll a die, literally one die. Like you say evens, I say odds. You roll the die, bam, evens. Okay, I tell how my model kills your model, and then you take it off the table.
It would be just as meaningful, and it would be more fun, and certainly more interesting. I think the concept is a mistake, but this is another subject. The fact that we as wargamers think we want a lot of things that objectively suck when you actually do them. That's part of my theory on wargaming terrain, for that matter. But so okay, Warpath was not great, but they took the models that they made using that Kickstarter and they started working on some other games. Most notably, they developed two games called Dead Zone and Firefight. And Dead Zone is a Necromunda-ish, kill team-ish skirmish game that is played on a grid of 3-inch cubes. Instead of using inches for movement, like you can move so many cubes, your range is measured in how many cubes you can fire. It's a wonderful system. It was not the most balanced. They've kind of struggled with that over the years. But I bring this up because just this year, they have released Dead Zone 3rd Edition, which is great. They have fixed, like, 2nd Edition dialed in a lot of the rules, but wasn't very balanced. 3rd Edition kept a lot of the rules, refined them slightly, and then balanced the lists. My first check when I got the 3rd Edition book was I went to, because I had broken their space rats, their Veermin. I was like, I made a version of a Dead Zone kill team that was just like, I win every fucking time because these abilities are wildly overpowered. And I was like, okay, can I do that again? No, I can't. Okay, let me go to my second broken team. I can't build that either. All right, fine. They learned some lessons. So the new book is much more balanced. The game is a lot of fun. I love Dead Zone 3rd Edition. Doesn't require many models. The models are all very reasonably priced. They have been doing squats since Games Workshop dropped them in the form of the Forge Fathers. They got Space Dwarfs, who have a really cool aesthetic. They have a faction, my favorite faction, the Veermen. They're like Skaven in space. They're space rats. They're theoretically genetically derived from rats that went out into space with people on spaceships and then grew into a sapient race and then started spraying acid on everybody, I guess. I don't know. They have,
logical. Carry on.
of course. They have their version of, and again, like, you want to say, is their version of the thing from 40K, but everything in 40K is so fucking generic. Like their version of space elves. Of course they have their version of space elves. Eldar didn't invent elves. They certainly didn't invent space elves. I like their version of it in Mantic because their elves are like, they believe that actually engaging in combat is a lesser pursuit. They're above that. They're better than that. So what they do is they sit on spaceships hovering over the battlefield and they project their consciousness down into what are called marionettes. And they're like these little robot forms that they control on the battlefield instead of actually fighting people, which is, it's kind of fun. They have, a couple of different human factions roughly equivalent to like Space Marines or Imperial Guard. They got their version of the big genetically enhanced power armor guys. Like if you like it in 40K, you can pretty much find it in Warpath. But okay, they've got Dead Zone, and this is why I bring it up, because one of the smart things they did was they also created a game called Firefight, which is much more like a standard game of Warhammer 40K in scale, in size. It's now optimized to play on a 4x4 mat, which I think is perfect. But it's much more like 40K. And it's the same point values, the same model count, stuff like that. I think slightly smaller model count, but you can obviously vary that. And they the thing that I really like about it is they had a few previous editions that very much like Dead Zone were good but not great. It took some time. They just released, and I mean just released, like 10 days ago, released Firefight 2nd Edition. And it, like Dead Zone 3rd, is a huge improvement. And the advancement from Dead Zone to Firefight is almost seamless because they also redid the rules in Firefight and some of the rules in Dead Zone so that stat lines are shared almost precisely. from unit to unit, from game to game. So if you play Dead Zone and you have an idea of how tough your Veerman stalkers are, you have an idea of how to play your Asterian marionettes, and then you upgrade the game to Firefight and you're moving from individual models to full units, the stat lines are pretty much the same. So you've got an idea of what a stalker is, how it functions, how to roll the dice, what the dice mean. It uses the same dice. It's just you got more of them now, and you have some more options. You got vehicles in Firefight where you don't have them in Dead Zone, and of course it moves from a specific 3-inch grid up to an open 4x4 board, and movement changes into inches. And they're great games. They're great games. Just rules wise, Dead Zone and Firefight are both really, really fun to play. They're quick, they're fairly balanced. They've got, I think maybe lore is the weakest part of Warpath. Their lore is a little vague in some cases, but it's like, I don't really mind that too much because it just sort of sets up humanity as being like a bunch of corporate douchebags, and the Forge Fathers, the elder races, as having better technology but being more reclusive. I think the Forge Fathers actually provide humanity with a lot of their advanced technology. There's the Plague, who are like horrible mutants, but they have like a shared consciousness among them, so it's like a mutant zombie faction of space dudes.
Hmm.
There's the whatchamacallit, the Marauders, who are like space orcs. Everybody's got to have their space orcs, but they're much more organized and militant than the orcs in 40k. They're not just a bunch of morons who, and, I do find the orcs funny in 40k. They're the race that has stayed a joke the longest, and I really appreciate that about them. But they're a little less of a joke in Warpath. They're still a little goofy, but they're more just a warrior race than anything else. More Warcraft orc, though of course Warhammer stole that too. Anyway, I recommend Mantic's new games. They're not even new. There's new editions of old games. Dead Zone and Firefight. They're cheap to get into. They're really their starter sets are not bad. Their kits are pretty nice. One of the complaints you could have about them is that a lot of their stuff was still in resin, which nobody really wants to work with. Most of that's moved to hard plastic. Their Marauders are now all in hard plastic. The Enforcers are in hard plastic. Forge Fathers are in hard plastic. Like, it's not as much of a barrier anymore. So, I mean, if you're looking for an alternative, pick up Dead Zone. Because if you like Dead Zone, if you play that game and you're like, this is fucking awesome, I think this is great, it's a very natural progression to be like, maybe I want to try Firefight. All I have to do is buy more of the same models.
I think
it's a taster, and that's what First Blood for Conquest makes me think of. Is like, just dip your toes in the water, and if you like it, keep going.
I think the dip your toes in the water is going to be when they release their skirmish version. That is going to be the dip the toe in the water. They just released a series of boxes for each faction.
Anemic.
They released what I think they even call it a taster box, where it's like,
they do. I have one of them.
A character model and then a smattering of the various troop options, so you can just kind of get a feel for it. I get the feeling that those are going to make perfect, whatever their smallest skirmish level, that's going to be the perfect level to just play the skirmish game. You can, of course,
really smart, because full size Conquest, I'm not gonna lie, daunting model count. Very daunting.
Yeah, like my army, I think when it's done, and this is me going as elite as possible, is probably gonna have somewhere close to, I'm gonna have 2 stands of 24 legionnaires, 1 stand of 24 of 1 unit, the big fallen divinity angel demon lady, and then a couple undead horse boys plus some characters. We're looking at close to like 70-80 models, which is 40k level model counts. And honestly, I'm like, not to say I haven't done my fair share. Last year I painted 7 40k armies over 2,000 points. I'm starting to lose steam in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, naturally, that's a Herculean feat.
So I think once this Old Dominion army is done, I think I might just be like, okay, like I'm more than happy to play 40k. I'm more than happy to, like, if I actually do still have the energy within me to do the Age of Sigmar slash 40k Demons army, my Be'lakor and Du Bois army. Then I'll have an army for Age of Sigmar. I'll have plenty of 40k shit. I'll have a conquest army, and then maybe I'll give this Mantic stuff a try. Or Mantic or BattleTech even. Like I love how when I first started watching
BattleTech much.
No, we haven't. But like more than all of this is me setting up saying these sound cool, but what I really want, having had you make me watch Gundam shit, I now want to make
I'm so glad that you did.
I want us to make like a 20mm scale Gundam game.
Can I just say real quick that I love your trajectory through the world of mecha fiction, because, correct me if I'm wrong, after listening to me for some goddamn reason, you actually started with one of the weirdest, most modern evolutions of the mecha anime, that being Attack on Titan.
Yeah.
And then have kind of like reversed your way through history back to Mobile Suit Gundam and are sort of going through it all again.
Oh, Drakari, I finished seasons 1 and 2. I've seen it through the beginning. So no spoilers for anybody here in chat, but I do recommend Iron-Blooded Orphans. Even if you are not necessarily a huge fan of like mecha anime, I think it's still just a pretty solid anime overall. Is it perfect?
It is. No. It's the prettiest of the Gundams by
far. Oh, easily. I mean, granted, like I went from Mobile Suit Gundam, Char's counterattack. Hello, Fluid Art. Thank you for the follow. No, it doesn't. Char's counterattack not only has some of the worst characterizations I've ever seen, but it has the worst anime character of all time. And I will stand on that particular hill, and I will fight anybody who says otherwise. So the 144 cheap Gundam kits are great, and there is someone working on a licensed Gundam rule set. There are some free rules for Gunpla models out there as well. Well, maybe
do our own thing though.
Yeah,
baby.
Yeah, of course. I've got a guy over here who 3D models shit. I can get my Barbatos. I can get my mobile workers.
All about the mobile workers. I'm a grunt suit guy. I'm all about the Leos. I'm all about the Grazes. I'm all about the Zakus.
And it's
don't read what Walter's Workshop wrote. Let's just pretend he didn't write that.
Someone clearly. What the? I don't even understand those words.
We're not gonna watch Mobile Fighter G Gundam. We're not gonna do it.
Oh, is that the one with the one with the sombrero?
Yes.
No, we're not going to watch that. We're not going to do that. But the point being is that all of these games sound fun, and even the idea of just making our own for funsies, it sounds great. But aside from like Conquest almost being in the case of my local game store, being kind of an anomaly, because they were an early adopter in the United States of Conquest, just all in on it. Not many game stores give new games a chance because that's a huge investment for more than likely failure.
Game store owners, like their margins are razor thin. It's really hard to run a game store. And that's why I never blame them for not picking up new properties, because when they're looking at their bottom line, 40K just makes sense. Just like Magic the Gathering just makes sense. It may be creatively bankrupt, but it makes sense.
I can't hear you over the sound of there will be a 40K Magic the Gathering card set.
Oh, God.
Yep.
Oh, God.
And it'll have Marnius Calgar in it. And the Ultramarines will have plot armor for 2 island mana and 2 colorless, and they'll just be immune to damage and fuck you and punch your opponent in the face. And make them cry.
Tap to take a piss in their cup real quick.
Tap Gilliman to put lighter fluid across your opponent's cards and set them on fire. But it's ultimately the idea of like giving Mantic a try. Like, yeah, someone's got to stand. Someone's got to be the one to stand up and take the first step. And yeah, maybe that's got to be me. Maybe that's got to be me at the local game store. Or whatever, but
I recognized that myself a long time ago, and I have become that guy, and I've been that guy for a number of years now. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not the most rewarding role all the time. but when it pays off, it's a really, really good feeling. I play a lot of different games as a result, and I enjoy a lot of different games, and I've had some fantastic experiences. I play Warcaster Neo Mechanica almost exclusively with my buddy Hethrir from over the mountains, and we have a great time playing it. It's hard to find other people to play with. It is, but I can't let myself not support these new things. I can't let myself stop trying new things because it's these new ideas. It's these novel concepts, these brave few who say, you know what, I'm gonna give it a shot. We have to. We have to be the change that we want to see in the world, and I take it on myself as much as I can. It's why I own Maelstrom's Edge. Many of these games, like I'll tell you, one of the reasons I appreciate the low model counts in games like Dead Zone is because being this guy also means that what pays is having a few factions ready, so that you can say, you want to try this game? And they're like,
Oh, here's
I
your
gotta
4
buy new
options.
models, and you're gonna be like, just here's a faction.
How do you think I
Here's
feel
a
about
list.
40K? It's so much easier to convince. Like, I told a buddy of mine, like, who is still tangentially interested in 40K. He just started a new job. He's super busy, but I'm gonna get him back over here to play. I was showing him and his wife all the models that I was painting, and they were like, "Wow, look at you painting! Like, this is really cool. You're doing a great job." And I'm like, "Yeah, this is all for a game. Like you can use these are all different factions." And the guy was like, "Oh, cool." And I'm like, "Yeah, you want to play?" He's like, "Oh, I don't want to buy a whole army." Like, fuck that, just use mine. And then instantly the light switched, and he's like, "Okay, now it's just a matter of time learning to play the game, not I don't want to spend hundreds of dollars and hundreds of hours building and painting these things, and to learn a game that you might not even like." That's one of the reasons why
First
Tabletop
taste is
Simulator
always
is
free, baby.
oh, yeah. And then eventually, like, my hope would be that he likes my stuff enough that he's like, "Oh, I want to go buy my own stuff." But I know this guy well enough that he's like, "No, I'll just use your stuff. I'm good with it. I'm not, the aesthetics don't matter to me. I'm just here to play the game." And I'm like, I have someone to play with. We both win. So and as far as like just with a skirmish game, especially with using good modular terrain from ThunderheadStudio, you can exclamation point
terrain,
Thunderhead.
By the way, happens to fit the Mantic Dead Zone mat perfectly.
Yep. And didn't you say just with like a few extra pieces, it would almost be enough to fill a 40K board as well?
Oh yeah, I was actually really kind of surprised. After I just took my prototypes that I printed over the course of developing it and painted them up, and I was like, I wonder if I can fill a 4x4. Not only can I fill a 4x4, I can populate it fairly densely. It's remarkable how many options I have with what are basically just a handful of kind of the same piece over and over again, which is that's sort of what I shoot for. I don't like having to print lots and lots of different pieces. And every time I see a Kickstarter for terrain that's like it has over 900 files, I'm like, I don't fucking want 900 files.
I want 12 that I can use 900 different ways.
Yeah, I want them to be built in such a way that the same file can do a bunch of different things. And that to me is good design. Making a whole bunch of different shit is there's effort involved, absolutely. I respect the artistry involved in coming up with all those different looks, but I don't want them. I want something that's going to be more applicable in more situations, so that's what I try to make.
Sorry, the Maggie was standing at the bottom of the stairs like, did someone ask me if I want to go out? And my wife was asking her to go out. What a good girl. She barked at an old lady today. I'm like, why'd you do that? You're a good girl. But yeah, not to distract from what you were saying. The idea of having like a nice set of terrain that is versatile, and like, I mean, I love the fact that you took a joke that I said and you're like, if I get bored enough, I think I could make that work.
I'm working on it right now.
You are?
Yeah.
Do we keep it a secret? I'm totally down to keep it a secret.
I'm not even selling the files yet. Like, they're becoming available in the next few days in Steel Warrior Studios, and I'm already working on the next expansion to it because I like it and because I want more of it. That is the core reason. I'm not running fucking Kickstarters. I'm not taking anybody's money until I've got files that are ready to sell. I just want more of it. It's just it's taking the same grid build system and building more than just shipping containers on it. It's creating facades and things that can be put on top of them to create structures and grant more variety using the same building blocks. It's essentially what it is.
And the best part is the minimum in plastic as well that is needed to take one piece of terrain and turn it into another.
Yeah.
And
with a system like this, the great thing is that I can create 3 files to add to it, and that can expand your build options exponentially. This is the strength of something that doesn't depend on there being that many different pieces. I hope people like it. I'm looking forward to it kind of getting out there in the wild. I've had good reports from the people that have been testing it for me and playing with it, so.
And I'm looking forward to being one of those people who gets his hands on it. Not just the fact that I get to get my hands on it for free, but I like to think that I've at least made you some of your money back by showing people your awesome bases and trays.
I always appreciate that Rhino push, but I'll tell you, honestly, what's more important to me, like I appreciate it. I appreciate you boosting the signal, making people aware of it. But what I'm always thinking is, I hope Rhino likes these. I hope they make your life a little bit easier. I hope that they improve your gameplay. I think that if I were to distill my theory of creation down to one thing, it's that these items, these accessories, terrain, bases, whatever I might make, this should make your game easier and more fun. It should enhance your gameplay. It should never detract. It should never slow down. And I agree with JP Got Rockets on the notion that I think that people fall in love with, and I don't want to say that like diorama or complex terrain boards can't be fun. I've played on a number of them, and the reality of them is they take a long time to make. They take a long time to paint. They are fragile. They're difficult to transport. They take a long time to set up. They take a long time to break down. And because of the detail in them, they are tactically limiting. They are good for when you just want to show off a diorama. Most of them aren't really very good to play on. You make, I want to build an Endor board, the Ewok City for Star Wars Legion. You really want to play on all these little tiny raised catwalks? Like, I see people build boards like that with like 9 levels. Look, it's like a real hive city. I'm like, okay, so I'm on level 9. I want to fire at the guy on level 6. There's all this crap in between us. Like, can I shoot that guy? I can't tell. What are the rules for shooting down that far? Are there any? The game wasn't really designed to work with things like that. So I think it's a question of what you're looking for. Because if that sort of game fires you up, then that sort of game fires you up, and that's what you should be doing. But it doesn't for me. I like things to be quick, and traditionally quick means it can't look good, but I think that that's not true.
That's one of the reasons why I liked what Tabletop Titans did with their terrain set.
I really like their terrain. Their fold out stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that I would personally use because I do like things being more solid than that.
Well, you're a 3D. You also have knowledge of and access to and the ability to utilize a 3D printer. Whereas someone like me, I have people like you, but not even on a regular basis. I don't have immediate access to someone who 3D prints stuff for me. So
which is why we're trying to why I'm pushing to get the physical bundles available for this too. But I look at that stuff and I think, you know what that is? That is a fucking godsend to TOs.
Yes,
that is like if I were running tournaments at conventions. Oh, I'd be using that. You better believe it.
Oh, I talked to the guys who run Adepticon, and I showed it to them. Like, what do you guys think of this? And they're like, absolutely not. You know what? Because they see something like that as being construed as cheap. And when you have physical terrain, that it does. But I think they're not quite for the convention level. But go to your local game store, kind of like regional tournament. That's exactly the range that are going to be the people buying 70, 80 boxes of this stuff.
Replacing the kind of game where you might wind up playing with a Kleenex box and a can of Mountain Dew as terrain.
Like I did that at Adepticon, actually. I played a game of Floorhammer, and it was amazing.
Your Tabletop Titans terrain is the perfect answer for that level of give a fuck. Because it's going to make it look better. and still function. And yeah, I'm trying to make stuff that is that easy to use,
but also tough
but
as
looks
shit.
better and is more durable. Durability is a big one for me, because the one thing you don't want to do is take fragile terrain out of your house to a game store or a convention and have it get fucking broken. Or the real one for me is, at the end of the day, those of you who have, a lot of us think like, I'm going to go play a game at a convention. You've done it. You know what it's like. You know how tiring it is to transport your stuff, to find where you're supposed to be, to set your stuff up, to play the game, standing on your feet. You got shit to do. You got to get back to your hotel room. You're supposed to be at a Q&A in like an hour, and now you got to break down your terrain and pack it because some asshole might break it if you just leave it there. Like, I want terrain that I can take and like put my arm on the table and a plastic bin at the end and go whoomph, and I'm done and I'm out of there.
That was the description. I'm so glad you said that, because I was like, how did he describe how durable he wanted his terrain? God, it was so visceral. And that's exactly like, I want to do something with my terrain that would make any normal 40k war gamer of any kind cringe. Like the way there's a guy in my local game store named Dalton, and this guy plays Imperial Guard. He is very cavalier with his models. When his shit dies, he picks it up by the fistful and like Kobe's it into a bin, like on the other side of the table. And I genuinely think, like, he says, oh no, I do it because, you know, like, I mean, they're just guardsmen, I don't care. And he's like, they're painted, I'm not like, these aren't models I spent dozens of hours on, you know, like, in they go. I genuinely think it's a terror tactic. I genuinely think he does it to unnerve his opponents. Like,
just to make him go, oh god.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my god, he did that to his own models. Like, I'm not thinking about my tactics anymore. I'm thinking about, did his paint chip? Did he break bits off of his models? And it's all, yeah, it's a power move. That's exactly what it is. But maybe it is time for it's time for a new generation, a new paradigm of war gamers, skirmish gamers fighting on skirmish game design terrain. Like, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't you like a set of stairs for your models that your models can actually stand on? Thunderhead built it. Did Thunderhead do it? Thunderhead did do it.
I'll tell you, one of the things that I also thought about when I was making it was standardized distances, because I realized as I was playing with it the other day, I mean, I realized this before it, but I was thinking about it the other day, is when you know, like, well, this piece is 6 inches long, this height is 3 inches high. There are points when you don't have to use a tape measure anymore.
Yep, I'm at one end.
I'm standing at the end of the container.
Whoop.
We moved the length of it. I just moved 6 inches. Oh my god, you knocked me off the container. It's 2 levels up. Each level's 3 inches. I fell 3 inches. I roll 6 dice or whatever the calculation is for your game to take fall damage. Like, yeah, that's so much nicer. It's just taking the guesswork out of it. But again, while still having it look good, I understand that is a concern. It's a concern for me too. And I put a great deal of effort into trying to make things both look good and thematic and play well and be durable. Durability is a big one for me, and packability. I'll tell you this, I'm working on something right now also for this new set, because I realized as I was stacking it, like, you can really just take this terrain and go chunk, 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 and Lego it together into just this perfect block. And I'm like, you know, if I had a thing that went underneath that and some straps and a clamp, I could just carry this like a suitcase. So I'm making that right now. I'm working out exactly how that's going to work, but it's and I thought, you know, if I made some buildings with removable tops, you could store your accessories and models inside of it and then stack it and then carry it like a suitcase.
See, folks, this is what we're talking about. This guy is a one-man iterative idea machine. So he takes a concept and thinks, again, as a player, as a gamer, how do I take what I have and make it more usable for myself? Oh, well, if I tweak this one little thing, if I put in a little bit, if I put in another hour or two into this particular project, I could stop. But if I do that little bit extra, I just unlocked like 50 different options for arrangements of the models, or standardizing the measurements makes it that much easier for me to play with my things. Makes it easier for you too. So
this is the core of it. It is very, very selfish. Ultimately, I'm doing this because I want it, and
it doesn't exist, so I'll make it.
Yeah, and if this is why I got into 3D modeling, literally with BattleTech. The first thing I made was BattleTech terrain. And I looked around at the options. I knew what I wanted. I looked around at the options and I was like, it doesn't really exist. Nobody's really making it. Maybe I could just make it. And the response to my Hextech terrain has been huge. I didn't intend to sell it. I had no intention of selling Hextech, and that has become like a brand. I literally was putting stuff up for free on Thingiverse because I'm like, I made this for myself. Here, maybe you want to use this. And I got an email from somebody saying it was one of my guys wants me to print some of your stuff. I want to talk about maybe like I give you some money and I print your stuff for people. I was like, sure, okay, whatever, we can do that. That's fine. And then that just grew into Hextech is now a fairly major brand within the niche of BattleTech, and
Thunderhead Studios. I'm kind of
permitted
a big
me
deal.
the small fish in a tiny pond. But it has that small level of success has permitted me the freedom to purchase tools, to purchase software, and to spend the time to pursue what really is a passion for me. I fucking love miniature games, dude. I love them. I love thinking about them. I love building minis. I love painting them. I love playing them. I love talking about them. I love the time that I spend across the table from a good opponent, from someone who is smart and funny and witty, and we get in each other's heads. That is my favorite moment. That is what this all culminates in for me. And you know what I don't want to be thinking about at that time is how fucking annoying my terrain is.
this crescendo of like uplifting thoughts, and then I just don't want to be thinking about shitty terrain.
It's all systemic. It all grows from the same seed.
and I mean, I'm thinking about like the getting in each other's heads, and I'm thinking about playing Conquest against you, and then I'm looking at my old Dominion and thinking about Dalton, thinking about, oh, what kind of mind games would I play on Thunderhead if I like, oh, you killed a stand? Cool. And just yeet them across the room. Just like, oh, who's in whose head now?
There's a guy who's in my chat sometimes called Play and Win. He's a buddy of mine from down in San Antonio. We used to play Rune Wars together just constantly. And we'd have turns in that game where, because in that game it used the double dial system, kind of like Star Wars X-Wing, but it was 2 dials instead of 1. And you'd set the dial for what your unit's going to do at the beginning of the turn, and then you'd put it there so your opponent couldn't see it. And then, the turn would start, and you'd alternate choosing a dial to reveal and then doing the action. So you had to commit to your action before you knew how the round was going to play out, which I loved.
Yeah, that's one of the things I loved about X-Wing. That like whole
it's great.
And Conquest has that with
I genuinely want to rip off at some point.
Well, with the card system in Conquest, it's very similar to that. Like, because you're sitting there looking at each other like, I'll put them in this order.
It's not as much of a commitment, but it's a similar style of commitment that encourages the same style of gameplay. And like we had some games where, and I would just fuck with him sometimes because he had a super analytical mind, and he'd set his dials and I'd set my dials, and he'd go, okay, right, and I'd be like, no, wait, and I'd pick up a dial and I'd change it. And I wouldn't change shit. I would move it around one full rotation to right back where it started, and then I'd put it down. And I could just watch the gears turning in his head, and he would stare at me. And then maybe he'd change something, or maybe he wouldn't, And it was like, we would do this for long periods of time, and I had a lot of fun with it. Sometimes I genuinely would change my orders, but sometimes, yeah, I'd do it in a full circle, and I'd put it back down. And we got to the point where he could tell if I had done that sometimes, where he was like, that was the same spot. There's a little cardboard nub on the edge of your wheel, and I saw it go all the way around. I'm like, fuck. Damn it, okay, fine. But yeah, we had a lot of fun with that. And the fact that you could completely whiff charges and stuff in that game was so cool. You could set up this perfect charge, and they do an action you don't expect, activate first, slide to the side, and your force, your cavalry just goes just right past them, and you're like, ah, oh, no.
And again, that sort of thing with the command stack can and has happened in Conquest. I was playing some demo games, and I specifically, like, you start thinking, like, what does he think I would activate first? And then what would he activate? So how do I anticipate what he's going to do or mitigate the fact that I might not get to go first, and so on and so on and so on. So all of this culminates in, folks, I hope that you have been informed of games that you might not have heard of before. Most of you know who Thunderhead is. If you didn't, I hope you do now. Exclamation point Thunderhead in chat. Again, follow him on Twitch, follow him on Instagram, check out his page on Steel Warrior Studios. All three of those things are listed right there in chat when you type in exclamation point Thunderhead. I hope because it had all this conversation, like getting some of the ideas of the lore, the ideas behind these games, even the silly joke of a game that I really want to make. All of these things has really lit a fire in me to, like, not just with my conquest, but yeah, I'm still gonna play 40k. I like it. I like 40k. I don't. Yeah, and I don't need to apologize for that. I like 40k, but I also like conquest, and I'm willing to try other games. 40k was the very first thing I ever got into, and because of 40k, I have now understood or begun to understand the basic backbone of what makes a war game. Like you have your stat blocks, you have weapons characteristics, things like this are so different across so many different games,
but they're all action economy.
But they're all similar enough. Action economy, like you said, all these things, army building, they're all similar enough in those respects that by using 40k as my learning vehicle, I now feel comfortable to step into other games. And I think this might be the time to do that. So special thank you.
Make a game that we want to play.
Oh God,
we're not gonna make a game saying we're gonna be the next GW. Let's just make a game that we want to play.
Yeah, and I mean, like, just to like completely derail this, the ending of this podcast, to say that like my mind immediately goes to, for that like Gundam game that we want to make. I want to make something that is like the whole like dial or command stack system. I want that. I want like special
use the dual dial because it died with Rune Wars and it doesn't seem like it's coming back, and it's amazing.
Well, it seems like the kind of thing you could easily explain with like the lore of the game. Like, oh, the Gundams have the AI thing and they're reacting to each other, so you have to preset your moves and then they react to each other, and that's what you actually do.
I think it's stated in at least one of the Gundam series that most people use a library of pre-programmed motions in combat.
They even talk about that in
how they can control those machines with all those complex mechanisms using simple controls.
Well, that's what
the same thing in Votoms.
Well, that's what what's his name? One of the characters in Iron Blooded Orphan says. He's like, oh God, I hate this suit. It doesn't have any or it doesn't have as many protocols for fighting maneuvers in space. Yeah. But it had more for fighting on land or some shit. Mm-hmm. But the point being is that, yeah, absolutely. We make the game, or like Winters said it about 40K when there was a lot of negative backlash about some of the stuff GW was doing at the time, and I'm sure a lot of it still is true now. Like, we are Warhammer. Warhammer is not GW. Like, we can take the game and do whatever we want with it.
Without us, it's a bunch of nerds in Nottingham talking about fascism unironically.
And the same goes for like any other game. Like, if you really miss Rune Wars or Rune Lords,
it was Rune Wars.
Rune Wars. So if you really liked Rune Wars, then like and like you don't have access to the models, or you feel you can make some changes, make some changes. Make your own game. Like, fuck it, someone will play it with you.
If I may, really quickly, just reiterate real quick for anybody watching or listening. Again, I strongly recommend that you just take a look at a few particular games and systems, that being Maelstrom's Edge from Spiral Arm Studios, both Dead Zone and Firefight from Mantic. Take a look at Warcaster Neo Mechanica from Privateer Press. And let me think, are there any other ones that I would really strongly recommend? Definitely, if you haven't, take a look at BattleTech. The only thing I'll say about it is there was a recent push of people saying, I'm leaving 40K, we're going to go play BattleTech. It's a completely different game. It has more DNA in common with like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh God, they'll get that THAC0 away from me. I know I have the Advanced D&D book behind me, but that is purely for aesthetics. THAC0 can go die.
It's like a random bullshit generator more than it is a balanced game, but it's a lot of fun, and you should definitely check it out because it's not hard to get into. Just take a look at them, and if I can encourage you to just do one thing as a wargamer, if you've never played anything that isn't Games Workshop, find a buddy that you like playing games with and hopefully has a little bit of disposable income to try something new.
Well, if you're
And
playing 40K, you have disposable income. I hope.
Disposable income that isn't earmarked for the latest fucking box set.
Looking at you, Horus Heresy $350 box set.
All right, Jesus Christ. Just try something new. Just try something new. Take the step. Acknowledge that you're spending money on toys and you're not making an investment and you're never going to get it back, and just try something new. Water the grass a little bit.
Marvel
Water
Crisis Protocol, give that a shot.
The
Yeah.
soil in which the seeds of creativity grow, because there are people out there who have devoted their huge portions of their lives to bringing new games to you. And if we don't patronize them, if we don't even try to patronize them, we're just going to wind up with
only GW.
More fucking Marvel movies, more meaningless gray sludge in the entertainment industry in the form of whatever Games Workshop sees fit to give you, because they've crushed all their competition and they don't have to try anymore. Make them try. Make them work for your money.
You know, it's funny, Thunderhead should mention television. If anybody frequents Thunderhead's streams, you know he has opinions on film and television.
Yeah, one or two.
One of those things that he enjoys is anime. And I recently was getting into anime. One of the things he got me to do was, as some sort of unicorn human who had never ever seen a certain anime called Attack on Titan, and somehow also managed to avoid any spoilers for the show. Period.
It's kind of amazing.
He insisted that I watch it and that we talk about it. Now, I have kind of fallen off that wagon with season 3. Not to say that I didn't like the beginnings of season 3. I do. But we still need to finish that conversation, and we did record our conversations.
We have.
If you folks would be interested in that, I can release them, and you can get the, what did we call it? We Two Dudes?
We Two Dudes.
We Two Dudes talk about anime.
Was a little weak in the beginning, but we're sort of finding our stride.
So if that's something you guys want, myself and my long lost, I'd go so far as to say cousin or half brother, Thunderhead. We also have a little side project already where we're talking about anime, and I think that after staying, I guess, in the mecha genre theme, as you pointed out with what Attack on Titan is, diving into maybe we go to the mecha anime roots. While you
should at some point talk about Evangelion just to get it out of the way, because like
it'll be the shortest episode ever.
At this point, with the anime that you've watched, I think you're ready. You're ready to properly consume Evangelion and all of the psychosexual confusion, trauma, and suicidal ideation that it represents.
Don't care is poopy. So that's at the end of it, it's just like, oh, do you see the symbolism? Do you see the meaning? Do you see what he was trying to articulate through his art of his feelings on his life and what it means? Yep. Still hate it.
Okay. That's fair.
Scene.
And this is where it ends with a bunch of people clapping that the main character isn't going to kill himself.
Yes, he did it.
Okay.
The minimum standard to literally exist.
You've decided to live.
So
that's the show.
And then I love how everyone in chat is just yelling about Thaco. Like
well,
that,
I got a good crowd.
It truly an artisanal group, a group that of culture and class. But yeah, in the longest rambling summation, I'm gonna do my very best to take all of that, and I'm gonna condense it down to a 30-second blurb. Here we go. We talked about a lot of games that that do exist, have existed, and continue to exist in line with Warhammer 40K, and you should give them a shot. Because what do you have to lose? You're already spending your money on little plastic toys. Why not try a different game? You've played dozens of board games in your life. Just try a different mini game. You're already painting shit. It's literally just try something different. ThunderheadStudio, my wonderful guest, also designs incredible pieces of terrain as well as models and all sorts of other great shit for a lot of these games. Check out his stuff. Patronize him as well to show support for what he creates. I certainly do, am, and have. So In addition to this conversation, he and I also have a little side project that we have been starting where we talk about anime, television, films. We have a lot of films, a lot of shows that we want to cover and talk about in the future. Yeah, Streets of Fire and The Warriors. And we are going to, I'll start releasing those episodes as well if people are interested. And again, ! Thunderhead in chat, just like that. Check him out on his socials. Thunderhead, do you have any final summarizing? Give me 1 sentence. You get 1 sentence. Go.
It is possible to make no mistakes and still lose. That is not a failure. That's life.
Thank you for quoting our father, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, to Q in episode 3 of season 1.
No.
I thought Q was really early.
Q was really early, but that wasn't to Q, was it?
No, it was to Data. It was to Data. Walter is correct. Damn it.
That was to Data. That was to Data. That was in Peak Performance, which is the episode where they do this.
Damn it. All right. Well, I've lost all nerd cred. So with that said, I'm just going to end the recording on this. Thank you, everybody, for watching / listening. Expect another episode of Office Hours. Who knows fucking when? And anywhere you get podcasts, plus YouTube. I have a Patreon. Check me out there. Check me out on Twitch. Anyway, goodbye. Talk to you later.